Evening, everyone, and welcome to this regular session of the Bloomington Common Council for Wednesday, May the 18th. We will begin this evening by asking our clerk to please call the roll.
Here.
Here. Here.
Here.
Here.
Here.
Here.
Thank you. To summarize this evening's agenda, we have no minutes for approval. We will then move into reports from council members, the mayor and city offices, and we do have one this evening, hearing a report on the Bloomington Habitat Connectivity Plan, reports from council committees, and then our first opportunity in the meeting to hear from the public. That will be followed by appointments to boards and commissions, if there are any. We will have legislation for first readings first this evening to consider Ordinance 22-15 to vacate a public parcel regarding a 10-foot wide alley segment running east-west between the Beeline Trail and the first alley to the west, north of 7th Street and south of 8th Street, and this is Peerless Development, the petitioner. Followed by Ordinance 22-16 to amend Title II of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Administration and Personnel. This is to amend BMC 2.12.130. This is the Citizens Redistricting Advisory Commission. Legislation for second readings and resolutions will include Resolution 22-11 to approve and authorize the execution of a collective bargaining agreement between the City of Bloomington and the Fraternal Order of Police, John Owens, Memorial Lodge 88. Next, Ordinance 22-09 to amend Title 20, the Unified Development Ordinance of the Bloomington Municipal Code, technical corrections set forth in BMC 20.03. Ordinance 22-10 is next to amend Title 20, Unified Development Ordinance of the Bloomington Municipal Code, technical corrections set forth in BMC 20.04. Ordinance 22-11 is next to amend Title 20, Unified Development Ordinance of the Bloomington Municipal Code, technical corrections set forth in BMC 20.05, 2006, and 2007. Ordinance 22-08 is next to amend Title 20, Unified Development Ordinance of the Bloomington Municipal Code, and these are technical corrections set forth in BMC 20. And last on our agenda this evening, Ordinance 22-16 to amend Title II of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Administration and Personnel. And again, this is regarding the Citizens Redistrict Advisory Commission. We will have a next opportunity for public comment before we discuss our upcoming council schedule and then adjourn for the evening. We have a lot to get to. So again, if there are no minutes for approval, we will start with any council member reports, and I will start to my left with Council Member Piedmont Smith. No report. Thank you. Council Member Smith. No report. Council Member Flaherty.
No report, thank you.
Councilmember Rollo.
I have no report.
To my right, Councilmember Rosenbarger. Councilmember Volan.
Yes, I wanted to make a brief report. I have signed on to what seems to be, I mean, for me, it's not much more than a petition, but it's an organization called Coalition Against Bigger Trucks. And they're, I think, a nationwide entity that's trying to fight laws, especially such as are trying to be passed in Indiana, that would prevent or that would allow larger tractor trailers on roads that really weren't designed for them. And it calls into question the whole, all the assumptions that we make about our transportation system. If we don't think 18-wheelers are big enough, there are companies out there that would like to haul more on any road, county roads too, that aren't designed for them. I mention it now because I got a letter today about the new car assessment program that's that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is seeking comments on. And I was pointed to this by former county commissioner and city council member Charlotte Zitlow, whose daughter-in-law is asking everyone who can to make comments on this new policy, because one thing that it's not doing is questioning many of the assumptions that perhaps some of us have failed to notice about how cars are getting bigger, especially that the average car that Americans are driving are getting bigger, weightier, larger in the front. And there's an opportunity now until June 8th to make comments on this program that I wanted to call people's attention to, because I agree with Charlotte and with her daughter-in-law, Sarah Risser, that this is a matter that we should be thinking about, that we all maybe take for granted how much the small choices that we make, or the choices that manufacturers make, lead to undesirable outcomes. And from the letter, she says, the U.S. has lagged woefully behind Europe in terms of road safety for decades, but the gap is growing wider. In the U.S., road fatalities have been skyrocketing since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, whereas they've continued to decline in other similarly developed countries. Cyclists and pedestrian fatalities are outpacing total road fatalities, and this has been correlated with large SUVs and pickup trucks by the NHTSA. Very large SUVs and pickup trucks are making up an ever-increasing share of vehicular traffic. Larger vehicles are 2 to 3 times more likely to kill a pedestrian than smaller models due to their weight, height, and aggressive front-end vehicle design. Yet the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration has been unwilling to address this directly. You can see it because dimensions of cars are not part of the new NCAP program. And in case you don't have the context, Sarah Risser's son and Charlotte Zitlow's grandson, Henry Zitlow, was killed 3 years ago driving a Subaru Forester on a Wisconsin highway when a Dodge Ram truck towing a Ford Fusion that whose trailer didn't have brakes and was not connected properly to handle its weight, struck and killed him and destroyed his car. So we're all responsible for the vehicles that we put on the roads and for how we wield them. And that's not just true for between car interactions, it's also true for how we handle everybody else who deserves to be able to use a road, whether that person is in a car, on foot, on a bike, yes, even on a scooter. It's an issue of our time, and I appreciate her for bringing it to my attention. And between those two different initiatives, I want to say that I would ask everyone to rethink their assumptions about how they get around in a motorized vehicle. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sims. Thank you. Councilmember Scambolari.
No report, thank you.
I will just say that today I had the opportunity, and I was grateful for it, to attend the 10th Annual Catholic Charities Benefit Luncheon, and that was at the invitation of Michael Stribling, who is their new clinical director. It's always a pleasure for me to sit in a room with social workers and therapists, and these are some pretty remarkable people who have been dealing with some pretty remarkable stresses and strains in our community over the past several years. Needless to say, COVID has created a number of anxieties and mental issues for people, and so their caseloads have skyrocketed, needless to say. But the therapists involved here have stepped up to the job, and it's just wonderful that 21% of the clients they serve are on flexible sliding fee payments. They do not turn people away who need help. They have specialized therapies, and again, much needed as we think about healthcare in this community. Oftentimes, the mental health care of our young people as well as adults in our community is not necessarily thought of as important as physical healthcare services. So again, thanks to the wonderful work that Catholic Charities does in our community, as do many other organizations who provide mental health care for our community. With that, we now move to the mayor and city offices. We have a report this evening on the Bloomington Habitat Connectivity Plan. And Ms. Thompson, are you going to kick this one off, or? Welcome.
Sorry to disappoint.
Mr. Sharaf, did I pronounce that correctly?
Just Sheriff. Yeah.
Sheriff, thank you.
So thank you for having me today. My name is Ben Sheriff. I'm a dual master's student at Indiana University. I am also a fellow here at the City of Bloomington's Planning and Transportation Department. And I just want to say first, on behalf of the Environmental Commission of Bloomington, for allowing me to speak today and talk to you, the City Council. I appreciate it. And we're going to talk about today the project that we've been working on for about a year or so. So before I get started, I just want to make it very clear with everyone who the Bloomington Environmental Commission is. So they are a volunteer commission, actually, that advises the city on very important environmental issues. So, for example, they advise the city of Bloomington on how its actions and policies may preserve and enhance the quality of Bloomington's environment, including the life-supporting processes that natural ecological systems provide to humans and other organisms. So essentially, they'll develop reports, they'll gather data, they'll do some community engagement work around environmental issues in the city of Bloomington. And what's great about them is that they were able to come up with the 2017 Bloomington Habitat Connectivity Plan, which I'll be talking about today. And what's pretty cool about this plan is it correlates very much to the comprehensive plan of 2018, specifically goal 3.4 in the subsections along with that, and also along with the climate action plan, goal number G1, if you want to take a look and go back to that. And so essentially from the Bloomington Habitat Connectivity Plan, I'm not going to go into it all today considering it was developed in 2017, but I will discuss the 5 recommendations that they were able to develop. And so the 5 recommendations are as follows. The first being conserve habitat before, during, and after development. 2, prioritize the habitat potential and permanent connectivity of an area when making land use decisions. 3, connect isolated areas of habitat by producing green space corridors. 4, enhance habitat quality in stable areas. And 5, inform Bloomington residents of the ecological benefits of habitat connectivity and encourage citizen involvement in habitat restoration. And so over the past year or so, myself and the Bloomington Environmental Commission have directly targeted recommendations 3 through 5 through 2 deliverables, 2 action items. And I'll get to those in a sec, but I would like to just mention in the next slide why you all should care. And so the first reason being is, as you probably know, wildlife is in steep decline across the planet. For example, bee species are in a lot of trouble right now. Biodiversity is down quite a bit. And this is in one large part due to fragmentation and a lack of green space in urban areas. And so this is going to have a really terrible effects, especially in the city of Bloomington. It can cause problems with soil quality. It can also cause a lot of issues with dispersal of getting new tree species around the city. And it can also affect erosion for various different processes. And so wildlife just really contributes so many different environmental services that we're not even aware of really right now. So that's one of the reasons. And then obviously, I'm sure you have heard about climate change and how serious of an issue it is. And you've just developed a climate action plan, which is wonderful. But we need to really do whatever we can to increase the amount of green space that we have to make sure that we have climate resilient infrastructure, because in the city of Bloomington, we are expected to see not necessarily more rain, but a larger intensity of rain. So when it does rain, there will be increased flooding. And so we want to be able to develop things like rain gardens. We want to create bioswales as much as possible and other type of climate resilient infrastructure to combat this as much as possible. And so The city's already doing this, which is great. They're planting a lot of native species, which is awesome. I know MC Iris does a lot of work because the invasive species throughout the city are spreading quite rapidly, and this can cause a lot of problems with soil quality again, erosion, pollution can get worse as well because of these invasive species. And so we just want to keep that in mind as well. Another really important thing is that human well-being is just obviously going to be better when nature is around, whether it's going for runs in the forest or sitting at a park bench and watching squirrels play or something like that. There have been numerous scientific reports just saying how important it is to have green space and nature around, and it's just going to improve everyone's confidence and everyone's mood as well. And so this brings us to our deliverables, what we were able to develop. And so if you take a look at the map here, we have 3 high-quality areas of green space in green. And these were based off of 9 criteria that were developed back in 2017 or back in 2011 in the Green Space Trends Report. And I'm not going to get into all 9 criteria, but essentially it includes things like waterways, density of forests, and other things like that. In red, we have the low-quality areas of green space, and then the areas that do not have a layer on them are specifically just not analyzed. And so what we are essentially set out to do is connect the high-quality areas of green space with the low-quality areas of green space so that there's connectivity and there's essentially corridors between these areas. And so we directly targeted this by trying to talk to public landowners, and that's how we plan on distributing this plan. Because they have a lot of land and they can voluntarily contribute to the habitat connectivity within the city of Bloomington. And so we developed a map and a pledge. And so specifically the pledge goes into more detail about the habitat connectivity plan and what is required. So we're essentially asking private landowners to contribute to the habitat connectivity plan by planting native species on their own property, whether it's a centimeter squared or an acre of a tree or a shrub, it doesn't matter. We're just trying to encourage as much voluntary participation as possible. And so this brings us to the map. This is actually kind of a cool tool. It's an interactive map, and it's actually live if you had the link, for example, right now. And you can actually go on this website and create a pin once you receive the link and explain to everyone a description of what your property is and what you're planning on planting there, and what specific species and how large the land is as well. And you can see in the yellow circles, those are some areas that we're going to be directly targeting through community engagement. However, this doesn't necessarily mean you can't participate in the plan if your land is not there. We're just kind of saying these are maybe some of the areas that we're going to be directly deploying people of the Environmental Commission to contribute as much as possible to the habitat connectivity plan. And so, unfortunately, I will be graduating next week, so I will not be able to continue with these next steps. However, it's unfortunate that I didn't get to it, but there's still a lot of work to do with the habitat connectivity plan. And so I'm hoping the next fellow will take upon some of this work. And so some of the things that we need to do is we need to obviously do community engagement. We need to tell as many people as possible about this plan. It's really, really important that people aren't just oblivious of what we're trying to do here, and we want to talk to as many landowners as possible. We have already met with the neighborhood associations about a couple months ago. However, that was before we had kind of finished everything, so we need to recontact them and also contact some other organizations within the city. We also need to find some new funding channels. It's awesome that there's already a small and simple grant that the city provides for neighborhoods to purchase certain materials. However, we do need to find other funding channels to allow people to purchase native species, because we don't want it to be a barrier for people to not be able to afford buying some native species, which we do have funding for. I'm just not entirely sure how much we'll be able to fund once this plan hopefully takes off. So we'll have to explore that in future meetings. And then we need to update existing information. The layers that we have provided in these maps are from 2011, so obviously development has occurred since then. Green spaces have changed. They've been improved upon in some areas and decreased in other areas. So that's something we really need to do. We need to gather some aerial imagery data and digitize some of that as soon as possible. And then also the Bloomington Habitat Connectivity Plan. It was made in 2017, so we can also start developing some new ways to update that and come up with some new ideas for certain recommendations to the city. And then we also need to create some binding goals. What's awesome is the climate action plan. However, none of the goals are binding, and none of the goals are binding within the habitat connectivity plan. So to ensure certain things get done and we stay on track of increasing the amount of green space within the city, we need to do whatever we can to start passing some binding goals. And then lastly, we need to do some community engagement, community organization. We need to work with other organizations such as MC Iris that have the same goals, and this is going to allow us to do as much as we can with less people and less work. By putting two heads together, it's going to make this process much easier. And so that's all I have for you all today. If you have any questions, please let me know. But thank you for having me on behalf of the Environmental Commission, and thank you.
Well, thank you, and I think it is not unfortunate that you're graduating. I think congratulations are in order. And we do thank you for the good work that you've done with the Environmental Commission. Are there any questions for Mr. Sheriff? Councilmember Scambolari.
Yes, two questions. Thank you for the presentation very much. I'd be interested in hearing more about the kind of feedback you received during your meetings with neighborhood associations. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, Linda said it best. I remember she said it a few months ago that she said it was inspiring. People seemed very interested in this plan and were excited to get it going. However, I just will say that it was not all the community members in the neighborhood associations. It was really only people that were interested in this. It was kind of just a trial run, but people were very interested. People asked a lot of questions. I think we had a total of somewhere around 30 people attend.
Good.
Yeah, and this includes leaders of the community neighborhood associations.
Good. And I have one more, but I can wait and do the second round. Funding channels are always of interest to City Council, of course. And I appreciate what you've said about allowing people to purchase native species to create these corridors. Are there other objectives that we're trying to reach with increased funding is one question. And then how much money are we talking about? What could that look like?
Yeah, so I mean, as of right now, since we haven't even really launched the plan yet, and we don't really know what the interest is, I can't really speak to how much money. However, I will say that the Environmental Commission is allotted a certain amount of money every single year, and I know we can definitely purchase a certain amount of native species from the DNR ahead of time, which is fairly cheap. They do not charge very much, and I know for a fact that we could purchase quite a few native species from them at a pretty low cost and definitely within our budget. However, if this really tracks and everyone wants to participate, then we may need to look at alternative sources for funding.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the presentation and the work. I wondered about the evaluation of green space. What's the criteria you use to evaluate high quality versus poor quality?
Yeah, so I don't know all the 9 criteria off the top of my head right now. However, it's based off of things like the slope of the area, the density of forest. It's also based off of things like how many waterways are in that area and how well the soil is suited for absorbing some of that water intake and whether or not it's prone to flooding and various things like that. Linda, do you know? It's from the Coberry report, I think.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
so yeah,
it's the
they were the
Coberry
ones who
report.
developed
I'm
it.
familiar with that. I just wondered about, like, in the future, evaluating. We've done a tree survey, so those should map, but there could be other means to determine, the best vegetation for wildlife migration and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think it's definitely important for the next fellow, whoever wants to work on this, to digitize some new layers from the aerial imagery that's a little bit more up to date. I was told actually right before this, I was talking to a city employee, and he was telling me that there actually is data that was posted recently from 2019, but I could be wrong. I haven't checked that yet, but that can definitely be used to update some of these layers on GIS.
Well, it's good work. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, once again, we thank you so much. And Ms. Thompson, we thank you for your mentoring and your supervision of this project. We hope it continues. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we have any reports from council committees, and I do believe we want to hear from Councilmember Smith.
Thank you. I try to remember, since I'm on the Plan Commission, I keep trying to remember to give a little report to my council members and everyone that's listening about the Plan Commission activities. So there was a fee, I'll summarize it briefly. There was, city staff has corrected and or brought in line some fee structures, fee changes for some activities for building and that would be related to planning. In that non-controversial, just brings it in line with other cities and brings it up to where it should be. And that was fine, and that was approved. There's a couple of petitions that are being continued to June 13th. The Robert Shaw PUD on Prow Road and the Strausser construction project at 3000 and 3070 South Walnut. That's a self-service building, storage building, and the other one was a preliminary plat amendment, and those are just being continued. So if anybody's interested, that'll be June 13th. On the consent agenda, which is a little bit different than City Council, some things brought forward that everyone has kind of been previewed and will just agree by a unanimous vote that we can just go forward on it. And that's the Trinitas Ventures at Arlington Park, where we've heard before it is, they just withdrew their petition for a PUD, and so that was just approved. The last item was there's an apartment complex, 213 units, off of 17th Street at 1414 West Arlington Road. So this was interesting. So we were going to approve that, and I brought up as a result of conversations with people out in the community and my colleagues on council about the way buildings and apartments sometimes are built to be quite monolithic. And so we had a great discussion about what can be done to make that look different. As a result of that, really the truth is the UDO needs maybe to be tweaked. And so we did have a really good discussion last night about that. I introduced an amendment to try to have some changes to the building, which could only be at this point kind of cosmetic to make it look less monolithic. And it was voted down. So gave it a good try and to make it look different, to make it be more interesting as opposed to monolithic. However, we did have a good discussion, and so I think we will be going forward and thinking about perhaps changes to make those kind of really large buildings appear really less large and maybe perhaps more friendly, maybe not as big a masses. So anyway, I wanted to give that report to the council and to the public. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Smith. Anyone else for council committees? Councilmember Flaherty.
What a question for Councilmember Smith, in order.
Certainly.
Thank you for the report, Councilmember. In the context of monolithic buildings and large structures that sort of don't read well to human scale and pedestrians, I've personally always found the anti-monotony standards, like in the UDO, to be inadequate to meeting that issue when we're talking about like block-sized buildings. Was the topic of maximum building widths brought up at all in that conversation?
It did not. It was not specifically brought up, but it was recognized that the UDO is inadequate in addressing the monolithic appearance and building of those kind of buildings. So I think the Plan Commission is. They were very interested in it, and we had a really great discussion. And so perhaps for the future, that's where we're going to go, is to try to figure out a way to mitigate that.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. At this point, we are at our first opportunity for public comment. I will now turn to our council attorney for assistance here. If there are members out there watching on Zoom, we can see a show of hands as to who would like to speak on a topic not on this evening's agenda. And we will begin with members of the chambers here who are approaching the podium. And if you would sign in, please. I believe there's a sign-in sheet there at the podium, and state your name. Do we have any hands raised at this point from Zoom?
I do have one indication of a public comment on Zoom, and for folks on Zoom who would like to comment, you can use the raise hand feature where you can find that by clicking the Reactions tab in your control bar or the More tab in your control bar. If you're not able to locate that raise hand button, please just send a chat to the meeting host and we can recognize you that way. I just have one at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And is there anyone else here from the chambers who would like to make a public comment? And I'm not seeing any hands go up, so Mr. Haggerty, state your name and you will have 5 minutes.
Remarkable. I'd like to announce that the Flying Haggertys are with Cirque du Soleil in the, I'm the patriarch of the Flying Haggertys, Mark Haggerty. And the Flying Haggertys are with Cirque du Soleil tonight as the Flying Act. So that's something for Bloomington. So I came down to the council meeting last week for basketball goals down at the Switchyard Park. They've been unplayable for most of 4 months, and during that time I've spoken to the employees on the ground, security, which kicks everyone out at 11, even our healthy young skateboarders. Scott Oldham from BPD, Parks Department Management, numerous times, and left messages from Mike Dekoff. Thank you, Susan Sandberg, for calling the parks management. They've been telling me the same thing for months. The parts are on order. There are special reasons this basketball court's important. Both goals are, one goal is the wrong angle and the other backboard won't go up, and it's been like most of 4 months now. First of all, it's a central place where poor kids can play. Poor kids cannot afford the Y or a pass to IU, and if they did, both are so far away from where they live that transportation would be prohibitive. Second, Bryant Park is far from our poverty living, and 9th Street Park is high on a hill with no fence, so the ball can roll hundreds of feet down the sledding hill several times a game. The same is true of the Crestmont goals, no fence and hundreds of feet drop. There's no place indoors for poor kids to play a pickup basketball game in the afternoon in the winter or rain. Neither the Boys and Girls Club nor Banneker provides such, and late teen males are such a problem. Banneker used to be such a place when it was still run by the neighborhood, but not presently. The Switchyard Park basketball court is the most racially integrated place in Bloomington, much more integrated than our Black Lives Matter rallies. It's also the most class-integrated place. The college kids and essential workers, young and old, male and female, black and white, all play together in a central location where they don't constantly lose the ball down a steep incline. It's easily reached from the B line with parking, bathrooms, water, and security on site. It has benches for spectators and parents too. Now, Bloomington provides dog parks, baseball diamonds, golf courses, lighted tennis courts, lighted skateboard parks, convention centers, parking garages, performance arts auditoriums, and so much more that are mostly used by higher class white people. Why not spend a little where our poorest to recreate? Basketball fights crime. Young males with time on their hands are our constant visitors to the jail and courts. The time between school getting out and dark is our prime time, crime time. Boys that can integrate socially into basketball are spared that. Some of the male inmates at our jail and prisons have children with no fathers. Basketball has been a way for me to help tend to these hundreds of local boys. I have some that are doing well after growing up with incarcerated fathers, but playing pickup basketball at the Y. I've seen grandmothers bringing the same boys night after night before the boys could drive, and they still come every night after they're old enough to drive. I have 2 further requests, besides getting those goals up. I understand the Parks Department has some money. Since the baseball diamonds and tennis courts and the skateboard park all have lights till late at night, and we're the basketball capital of the world, why not put lights at the basketball court? On behalf of our basketball players, please install lights. Second, please install pads over the goal standards. The Parks Department responded to my request for pads on the goal standards by saying they were already covered for liability by certain national playground standards. I've seen several kids hit their heads diving for the ball, and there are bolt protections at the bottom that are somewhat more dangerous. The Hyper building has padded their uprights because of such experience. So, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Haggerty. Now, who do we have on Zoom? Oh,
I think I was blocked by Ms. Haggerty when you asked about hands. Sorry. Okay. My name is Mike Carmen. I'll try to stay focused because I'm going to have a tendency to get off into tangents. There's a lot that could be said, but I was prompted to come tonight to speak. I think it was Mr. Smith had the guest column in the HT raising the issue of high cost of housing, and that would start a conversation, but there's so much more that needs to be talked about and some concerns with the city's complicity in the problem. So to be more specific, there's at least one report that talks about a 1.5 million shortage in supply for new housing. A commentary to that report from someone else said it was probably closer to 7 million. We know it's an issue locally. It's a significant problem of shortage of supply for single-family homes, which is contributing greatly to the high cost. I see that every week when I'm writing purchase agreements for people who are in a hurry to get it to the seller to get it signed because somebody else is going to come in and offer even more because there's nothing available. And I've had a conversation with the county assessor about the values of some of these properties, and her comment, because frankly, I see what they want for it, and I go out and look at it, I'd call it a shack. And her comment was, but somebody will pay that for it. I can't do anything but increase the assessed value because that's what people are paying for it, and it's not going to get any better. So why do I say the city's complicit in that? Because there is no one cause to the housing cost problem we have. Some would call it a crisis. I would. It took 30 years to develop. There are numerous contributing factors to that. But supply being one, and in recent years in this area, supply I would suggest is the most predominant cause for the ever spiraling upward cost of housing. Now, we're talking about single-family homes. So where's the city's role in this? The city announced about 3 months ago through CBU that sanitary sewer service will not be extended beyond the corporate boundaries. And that's a direct result of the annexation fight. So we have now politicized sewer service. To the extent you believe sewer service as opposed to septic is a public health issue, we have politicized public health over annexation. So what's the impact of that decision? I can tell you now, one project, a small one, 41 homes, that project is dead in the waters because they can't get sewer service extended. Now, there are issues, county rules on subdivision approval, and more than 3 lots require sewer, not septic. You cannot do more than a 3-lot subdivision on septic. You have to have sewer. And if you're not familiar with the process, In those kind of situations where there's going to be a project proposed that's going to need sewer service, the developer contacts CBU, requests what's called a will serve letter to get a commitment from CBU that, yes, we will be able to extend sewer service to that area and serve this project if it gets approved. The actual cost of that extension of sewer service is borne by the development. CBU doesn't pay to extend those sewer mains. That's all private development money that does that. But it's the opportunity to do the sewer connection that's critical to getting those housings approved. And so that 41 house project, which is just another phase of ongoing PUD out west side of town, just off 48, is dead. I know of 2 other projects that are being pulled off the table after that came to light. I don't know how many have been stopped in the planning stages because developers are saying, and they're saying pretty loudly, I'm not putting any money into starting this development project because if I'm not going to be able to get sewer extended here, it's never going to get approved. So there's going to be all those invisible loss of housing. And that's the critical issue. You cannot fix the cost of housing. It is not a government fix. But you can avoid being a contributor to the problem. And one of those contributions is this decision to not extend sewer service over an annexation fight has killed the opportunity for new housing development outside the corporate limits. And there's going to be other fallout from that. I don't know how many, and I'm not going to be in a position to be able to document it, but I have to wonder how many jobs are now lost. How many electricians, plumbers, excavators, who were dependent upon those subcontract works, doing the roofing on that house, putting in the electrical system, doing the plumbing of those new housing starts, how many jobs are going to be lost for that? We're not going to know for a couple of years because we're not going to see the full impact of this. But I'm greatly distressed at what this does to contributing to the high cost of housing only because it restricts trying to resolve part of the problem, which is inventory, available inventory and supply to meet demand. But I'm also really concerned that we have taken a political issue and applied it to sanitary sewer service. And I find that unconscionable. And I may be the only one that says that because I've asked around. I'm out of time. I will not belabor this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Carmen. And now we will go to our Zoom. Do we have other hands other than the one?
No, we don't. This is actually a comment from Sam Dove that came via chat that I'll read now. Sam says he's so done with the homeless. They leave trash in the park, and they took a shopping cart from Target, which they can't do without asking. They can't do that by living by the park. And that's the end of the comment.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Dove. Looks like we have someone here from Chambers who wants to make a comment. And if you would sign in and state your name, you will have 5 minutes.
Yes, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am here to speak to the scourge of gas-powered leaf blowers. My name is Philip Emmy. I'm a resident of Bloomington for the past 7 years.
Make sure that microphone is right up to your, yeah.
This will help.
It's not so much the mask, but if you can make sure you're pointed right at the microphone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As I was saying, I'm a resident of Bloomington for the past 7 years. Prior to that, I was a professor of city and metropolitan planning at the University of Utah. Let me read from a prepared statement. Leaf blowers typically produce at least 90 decibels of noise. Exposure of 2 hours of such noise causes permanent hearing loss. A 2-stroke commercial leaf blower produces as many hydrocarbon emissions in 30 minutes as an F-150 pickup truck does driving 3,887 miles. Gasoline-powered lawn equipment is a prevalent source of toxic and carcinogen emissions. Noise interferes with communication, sleep, and work. It degrades the quality of life by impairing communication and social interaction, reduces the accuracy of work, creates stressful levels of frustration and aggravation. The normally acceptable level of ambient noise in a residential area is no more than 60 decibels. 60 to 70 is conditionally acceptable. The higher levels are normally unacceptable. There are a handful of models on the market that meet the 65 decibel standard, but these are nonetheless still a problem. Noise controls space, it travels through walls, enters homes, molests bodies, violates privacy, stops thought, increases anxiety, and batters each of us into frustrated isolation. Leaf blower motors are inordinately large emitters of carbon dioxide, oxides of nitrogen, hydrogen carbides, and particulate matters. The two-stroke engine is a fuel of gasoline and oil mixture. It is especially toxic. Particles from combustion are smaller, typically smaller than 2.5 microns. A leaf blower causes as much smog as 17 cars. Common practice by professional landscapers is simply to blow plant debris off the property and into the street. Vehicular traffic then blows this material on neighborhood landscapes or back on the freshly blown sites. Noise also affects the operators. A leaf blower emits 75 decibels of noise measured at 50 feet. Not uncommon for a professional blower on the market to emit 99 decibels at 3 feet, where the operator stands. There's noise-induced hearing damage, vibration-induced hearing damage, heart disease, gastrointestinal problems, and then the combined effects of both noise and pollution on hearing and health. There is an issue with the entrained dust that is kicked up into the air during their use, including things like mold and pollen, lead, arsenic, mercury, pesticides, animal feces, and occasionally viral diseases. A small gasoline engine emits up to 20% of the air pollution in many cities. It emits precursors to smog and creates problems with particulate matter. And yet, a grandmother has proven that a rake and a broom are as fast as a leaf blower. Every person in the city is entitled to live in an environment free from excessive, unnecessary, and offensive noise. On a personal basis, I might note that 2 to 3 times a week, our outdoor patio is not usable. We don't spend time during the outdoors when the leaf blowers are in operation. We live opposite a rather large estate property where there is no one in residence except the lawn maintenance crew. They are a problem, and I'm not at all happy to endure the noise and pollution that they emit. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Is there another comment here? Okay.
Council members, my name is Hugh Kramer. 2 weeks ago, I presented just some of the destructive environmental effects of gas-powered blowers, including greenhouse gases and particulates like black carbon, aerosol, and CO2. I talked about the human health hazards, such as exposure to 60,000 times the EPA's recommended exposure to cancer-causing benzene and other toxic discharge. I also talked about the extreme noise pollution they produce, which is equaled only by jackhammers and chainsaws. Given all of this, it's astonishing that these things are even legal. And in several areas of the country, they are not. But in Bloomington, not only are they legal, we have no regulations on them whatsoever. Not a single mention of them in the city code. Nothing about time of day, days of the week, or even time of year. We don't even require mufflers or any kind of certificate for commercial users. Anyone can use them whenever they want, wherever they want, and for as long as they want, 12 months out of the year. And do they ever? For some of our neighbors, it's something to do, a hobby to keep their landscape pristine. They'll go for hours blowing nothing more than dust from their hardscapes. I have videos that show this. The Bloomington City Code regarding noise violations says, unreasonable noise shall mean sound that is of a volume, frequency, or pattern that prevents, disrupts, injures, or endangers the health, safety, welfare, prosperity, comfort, or repose of reasonable persons, which I believe most people are, and most people hate these things. This includes cars, horns, or signaling devices, radios, televisions, amplifiers, and musical instruments. Musical instruments are listed as egregious, something that you can call the police on, but not one of the loudest, most destructive, and mostly unnecessary machines on the planet. What a world. I live in a neighborhood on the east side of Bloomington near the College Mall. 10 months of every year, my family is assaulted by the noise and toxic fumes from these monstrosities. It has gotten much worse in the past several years because lawn companies and residents use them not only for fall leaf collection, but in fact primarily year-round to blow grass clippings and small debris from sidewalks, driveways, and other hardscapes after and between mowing. They even use them to clear snow. There is no escape. We moved into our home several years ago. We did some landscaping, planted gardens with the intent of using our yard to relax after a hard week of work. But inevitably, one of these things would fire up Friday evening at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, Saturday evening, Sunday mornings, Sunday evenings. Early on several occasions, we tried to entertain in our backyard, only to have to pack everything up when these things fired up because of the noxious fumes and the over-the-top noise. We never go outside anymore. They may not be going all the time, but we have no idea when they will, and when they start, are they going to go for 6 hours, or are they only going to go for 15 minutes? We have no regulations. There are countless research articles and opinion pieces from publications across the country that back this up. There's no escape even inside. The toxic fumes still filter through our house. The noise is not only audible, but loud. We have a hard time having a conversation in our own home when these things are going. 2 years ago, the house behind us was going until 7:30 p.m. on Christmas Eve. It dominated our home with the fumes and the noise. We were beside ourselves. That same year, another house behind us decided that New Year's Day would be a good day to gas blow, and they went nearly all day. At 4 o'clock, I called the police, and they said that these people were within their rights. What about my family's rights to clean air and a civil, peaceful life in our home? It's my right was the argument of people who argued against smoking bans, but our society doesn't work that way. You can do whatever you want to clean your lawn, but when it harms my family's mental and physical health, you should not be able to do it. We ban burning garbage for the same reason. Quality of life may be merely a touchy-feely term in some areas of the country, maybe even here in Indiana. But many cities throughout the U.S. have a keen understanding of the value of the quality of life and have limited or banned the use of gas blowers. I hope this council will look at the research, look at what other cities and towns are doing, and consider at least doing something, anything, to get back some civility that these things have destroyed. Thank you.
And that will end our public comment for this evening. We will now move, are there any appointments to boards and commissions? And I am seeing none, so we now move to a slightly different order. We're going to move to legislation for first readings.
Madam President, I move that Ordinance 2215 be introduced and read by the title and synopsis only by the clerk.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
And will the clerk please read?
Ordinance 2215 to amend the City of Bloomington zoning maps by amending the district ordinance and preliminary plan for a planned unit development, 1550 North Arlington Park Drive, Trinitas petitioner. The synopsis is as follows. The petitioner, Peerless Development, requests vacation of a segment of an alley running east-west between the Beeline Trail and the first alley to the west and situated north of 7th Street and south of 8th Street in order to continue using the right-of-way as part of the Johnson's Creamery site and to allow for a proposed development at 335 West 8th Street.
Thank you. And I would like to refer Ordinance 22-15 to the Committee of the Whole that will meet on May 25th, beginning at 6:30.
Madam President, I move that Ordinance 2216 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
Moved and seconded. Will the clerk please read? Oh, all in favor say aye.
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 Now will the clerk please read?
Ordinance 2216 to amend Title II of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Administration and Personnel, amending Bloomington Municipal, I'm so sorry, Bloomington Municipal Code 2.12.130, Citizens Redistricting Advisory Commission.
Thank you. I don't know if, Mr. Lucas, you want to say a few words. It is hoped that we get to this ordinance this evening. It is the last on our agenda for a second reading, but if you want to explain further.
Yes, thank you. I will note that this ordinance is also listed under legislation for second readings tonight to enable the council, if it wishes, to consider this ordinance for adoption tonight. If the council doesn't wish to consider it tonight or goes ahead and considers it but isn't ready to take final action, the council, when you come to that item, may wish to refer this to the Committee of the Whole next week or take some other scheduling action when that's appropriate. So that could include referral to a committee meeting next week or postponement to some meeting in the future.
Thank you. It is my hope that we get to it this evening, but we will play that as it lies. Next, we have legislation for second readings and resolutions.
Madam President, I read the wrong title for Ordinance 2215. Would you like me to correct that?
Oh, certainly.
Okay, sorry about that. Ordinance 2215 is to vacate a public parcel regarding a 12-foot wide alley segment running east-west between the Beeline Trail and the first alley to the west, north of 7th Street and south of 8th Street. Peerless Development petitioner. Sorry about that.
No problem. Is there anything more we need to do with that? Okay, very good.
Madam President, I move that Resolution 2211 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
It's been moved and second. All in favor say aye. Aye. And will the clerk please read?
Resolution 2211 to approve and authorize the execution of a collective bargaining agreement between the City of Bloomington and the Fraternal Order of Police, Don Owens Memorial Lodge 88. The synopsis is as follows. This resolution approves and authorizes the execution of a 4-year collective bargaining agreement between the City of Bloomington and the Fraternal Order of Police, Don Owens Memorial Lodge 88.
Madam President, I move that Resolution 2211 be adopted.
Thank you. And with us, we have Mr. Mike Rooker.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, council members. Michael Rooker, City Attorney. The administration and the Fraternal Order of Police, who we call the FOP, have agreed on the terms of a new collective bargaining agreement. The agreement contains a large salary adjustment, and therefore the agreement was contingent on the council identifying adequate revenue to support that adjustment. On May 4th, this council passed a local income tax increase, which satisfied the contingency. And so the final step in this process is now for the council to consider and vote on the agreement. From October of last year through February of this year, the administration and the FOP's bargaining teams worked diligently and in good faith to negotiate a new agreement. On February 26th, the FOP's voting membership passed the agreement by a majority vote. And with the approval of the LIT earlier this month, the council may now consider the contract for ratification. The contract covers 4 years from 2023 through 2026, and it will have a total estimated direct fiscal impact of $4,917,000 over that 4-year term. I want to take just a minute to run through the key terms of the agreement. First, the agreement contains a significant salary adjustment. For officers first class, salaries will increase by 13.17% in the first year of the contract, and for senior police officers, salaries will increase by 12.67%. For both ranks, salaries will increase by 2.8%, 2.9%, and 3% in the remaining years of the contract. All told, the compounded percentage increase to base salaries is 23%. The new agreement also contains an increase in longevity pay from $125 per year of service to $200 per year of service. And after an officer reaches 20 years of service, longevity jumps up to $5,000 total, where it is capped. When these changes are taken into account, we see a major real dollar impact on officers' salaries beginning in 2023. An officer first class with just 1 year of service on the force will see their salary increase by $6,694 in 2023, and a senior police officer with 20 years of service will see their salary increase by $9,189. These are big increases. Also, the additions to base pay and longevity will have a major impact on officers' pensions. Officers who retire in 2023 will have their pensions calculated against a base rate that has gone up by $10,200, which is a major benefit for our retirees. Outside of the changes to base salary and longevity, the proposed contract also makes changes to overtime pay and benefit leave. The parties agreed to remove a benefit called contractual overtime and have all overtime paid out in accordance with the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act. Also, the parties agreed to utilize a 14-day cycle to calculate overtime under the Fair Labor Standards Act. The proposed contract eliminates benefit leave buyback, a benefit which allowed officers to sell back benefit time in exchange for money, and instead allows officers to carry over 1 week of benefit leave per year. The contract also contains several cleanup items, which I'm not going to detail here, but are mentioned in the memo, and I'm happy to answer questions if you have particular questions on those cleanup items. The administration is satisfied that the terms of this historic collective bargaining agreement are fair to all parties. Indeed, this contract represents a truly unprecedented investment in public safety and in our police officers. The teams worked hard to reach this agreement, and the FOP has approved it. The administration asks the council now to approve the agreement as well. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Rooker. Are there council questions? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, I have a couple of questions. The clothing allowance in the new contract, it reduces the officer's clothing allowance by $1,100. So the new total is $500. So I'm wondering, does that reflect a decrease in the cost of the clothing that they have to purchase, or what was the basis for this change?
No, I don't think it reflects a decrease in the cost of the equipment that's necessary for police officers, although the department does provide a great deal of equipment without regard to clothing allowance. But we did take that clothing allowance and move it into base pay. So you'll see that that's reflected in the 13.17% and the 12.67% increase in the first year of the contract, which is nice because that's calculated against an officer's pension. You'll see it alter where the city ranks on that perf overtime list. But $500 should be more than adequate to cover the expenses that officers incur for the various items that aren't covered by the department.
So the previous amount was actually more than it cost them for uniform needs?
On average, in our estimation, yes.
Okay. All right, thank you. I have another question, but I can wait.
Are there any other questions? And seeing none, go ahead, Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, my other question was in the cleanup provisions. It says in your memo that the agreement clarifies that the net cost of any parking passes for FOP employees will not exceed $10 rather than the total cost. Could you explain what the difference is here?
Yeah, there's not really any significant substantive difference. There had been, some ideas that I don't think have gone anywhere at various times to have people pay the upfront cost of parking and to have that reimbursed in some way over the years. So just to clarify that it may be net cost as opposed to total cost, we wanted to insert that single word into that particular part of the agreement.
I'm sorry, I'm not following. So what is the difference?
So there had been some thought that one of the ways we might do parking, and again, this is not what we're doing, this policy hasn't gone anywhere, but it's possible at some point this will come up again as an idea in a room somewhere, that we would have employees pay more than $10, say, up front, or have that charged against employees, and then they would be reimbursed over the course of a year. So we just wanted to clarify that net cost would only be $10 as opposed to the gross cost for parking. But in terms of the impact on officers, I don't think there's no substantive change for that provision.
So what do police officers currently pay for parking?
I don't
Is that
know.
$10?
I don't know if they pay anything. Paul's sitting over there, $2, so just like the
$2,
rest
so
of
just like
us.
in City Hall.
Yeah.
And will there be any impact when the city implements a parking cash-out program, which has been talked about for City Hall employees?
Yeah, no, and I don't know that any officers are currently parking at City Hall, so I don't think so, no.
Okay, interesting. So this is when they park near the police station, in their private vehicles, or?
Yes, near the police station or other police facilities.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? And seeing no questions from council, we now go to the public. Do we have any members who wish to speak to the FOP contract?
Good evening, council members. Paul Post, President, FOP Lodge 88. I'll answer a couple of those questions real quick. The amount was okay before, but it never covered everything. And it depends year to year what the dollar amounts change. Shirts cost different things different years, boots cost different things, that sort of thing. So $500 is good. They've agreed to it. We appreciate it. We're going to make do with that. Out of what my prepared comments. I'm pleased to be here tonight as we reach the end of an 8-month process to bring the next collective bargaining agreement between your police officers and the city of Bloomington. Earlier this year, the bargaining unit at BPD overwhelmingly voted to accept this agreement for years 2023 through 2026. On behalf of my membership, I'd like to take this moment to specifically thank the council for their support and attention throughout this process. I will remind you that BPD remains 20 officers short of fully staffed, and we hope that recently announced incentives of the retention bonuses, housing benefits, and hiring bonuses, combined with this contract, will help BPD begin to refill those staffing losses. I'll also note here that while a massive improvement over years past, this contract remains a good first step in BPD becoming competitive to our peers around the state. I'll also remind the council that we're paying attention to the annexation process that seems to be ongoing with the ongoing lawsuits, and remind you that we need to begin working ahead the next few budget cycles to look at adding sworn personnel. If we're going to achieve that goal of annexation, we're going to have to provide adequate police service once it comes. And that's a very timely process that we need to begin now to fill those spots. Again, my members are pleased we have reached this point, and we look forward to continuing to work with you going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Post. Anyone else from the public? Do we have any raised hands from Zoom?
Not that I see at the moment. We'll just remind folks on Zoom, if you'd like to comment, please use the raise hand feature, which you can find under either the reactions button or the more button in your control bar. If you're not able to locate the raise hand feature, please just send a chat to the meeting host and we can recognize you that way. And I'm not seeing any hands shoot up at the moment.
All right, let us return to council for any final questions or final comments on Resolution 22-11. Councilmember Rallo.
Yes, just to say I'm very pleased with the agreement. I think it's a real important step in the right direction. It certainly makes us more competitive. I would like to know that we're at least keeping parity with other communities like ours, and I would like to see us in the top tier of in terms of benefits and pay. But I think sooner than that, we could expect some data regarding recruitment and retention, whether this pay and benefits is beginning to have some effect, because we should be able to see it within months. So if the administration would report back to us at some point in terms of the success of that, that would be really helpful for us, I think, looking forward. So thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Anyone else? I would like to say that as the council person who had the honor to be the person sitting in the room as a silent observer, I did watch the process go back and forth. It was fair. It was robust. It took a while. And I will say that, in particular, the FOP team did a wonderful job coming forward and speaking about the issues currently in the Bloomington Police Department. And Mr. Paul Post and Jeff Rogers were certainly members of that team that did provide good information that led to these good outcomes. And as many of us have thought, this is a very, very good start toward replacing some of the losses that we have seen over the years and making sure that our Bloomington Police Department remains competitive as well as well-trained, well-disciplined, and the kind of department that the community can increasingly feel confident in. And so again, my thanks to everybody involved on the negotiating team. It was a pleasure to observe it, and I am more than pleased to be able to support this evening. Anyone else for a final comment? All right, with that, let us call the question on Resolution 22-11. If the clerk would please call the roll.
Councilmember Rosenbarger? Yes. Volin? Yes. Sims? Yes. Scambalori?
Yes.
Yes.
Rallo?
Yes.
Flaherty?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
And Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
And that is unanimous, 9-0. Thank you very much.
Madam President, I move that Ordinance 2209 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
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 And will the clerk please read?
Ordinance 2209 to amend Title 20 of the Bloomington Municipal Code regarding technical corrections set forth in Bloomington Municipal Code 2003. The synopsis is as follows. This petition contains amendments related to the use regulations in the UDO. These amendments add, remove, or edit existing text to clarify and amend standards. There are 8 amendments identified. Your committee due pass recommendation was 7-0-0.
Thank you.
I move that Ordinance 2209 be adopted.
Second.
All right, and with us on Zoom, I understand, is Ms. Scanlon, and we have Scott Robinson here in chambers. So who would like to begin to introduce?
Good evening, Madam Chair. My name is Scott Robinson, Director for Planning and Transportation. I wanted to take this opportunity, one, to stall a little bit as Ms. Scanlon's having some Zoom connectivity issues, but more importantly, I wanted to use this as an opportunity, as an educational moment about the UDO amendments before you tonight. Maybe for the public and perhaps for council to kind of relive where we've been and where we're headed. As you recall, council adopted the comprehensive plan back in 2018, and one of the implementation tools that planners use is the comprehensive plan to implement through zoning code. We embarked on a pretty big community effort to update our 2007 Unified Development Ordinance. This council, as you recall, did a repeal and replace. We subsequently changed, renamed the zoning districts, and then updated the zoning map. Since then, we've kind of been in this mode of let's monitor and evaluate the UDO, and that's kind of where we're here tonight. We've had prior text amendments that we've considered. Staff has been evaluating the UDO based on the permits that they review, based on the petitions they get, to see if there's inconsistencies with clarity in the UDO, inconsistencies with adopted policies, accepted studies, other studies that the city has done. And so that's our judgment of what we brought forward before you this evening. With that said, there's certainly opportunity to, if we've missed anything, there's certainly opportunity for council to initiate a process for staff to consider other things. There's a couple ways that you could do that. A simple way would just be to adopt a resolution to help identify other studies, accepted plans, and things that you review, have accepted that are not adopted as part of the comprehensive plan, but maybe there's priorities that you see within those documents that you see as important. For example, the climate action plan. There's some aspects that I took the liberty to introduce solar-ready design in the UDO. So that's just one example. I might have missed some things. Another example would be to pass a resolution to direct the Plan Commission to take up specific UDO ordinance changes. That's per state code and state law. Or there are other things that you could do in order to help identify priorities. So I do know that each of you have your concerns. I look to you all to work with you to understand, to make sure that the UDO is relevant, that we don't fall into kind of bad practices in the past where we let the UDO sit stagnant for many years. It's a living document. The administration supports that. We again would like to continue to work with council and our Plan Commission, the community, to make sure that we're amending it as going forward. So you will see some of the amendments tonight, again, are based on those technical reviews. Some may seem a little bit more policy oriented, particularly when you're looking at the sustainability and affordability incentives. We're trying to recalibrate those based on our experience with that. So I just wanted to kind of help clarify kind of maybe where some of these amendments came from. And then I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Scanlon because I see she's popped up on the screen. So thanks for your time. And just a personal note, if you see me stand up and sit down, I'm just doing some physical therapy for my surgery that I had on my knee. So thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Scanlon.
So sorry. Having technical difficulties
And I do
over
believe
here.
you still need to
Thank
unmute.
you for having me. Can you hear me okay? Great. Okay. So the first ordinance we're looking at tonight is 22-09. Oh, it needs to be on conference. Yeah. Sorry, no problem.
Could you turn her up just a little bit more? Not that much.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for helping me. We are looking at ordinance 2209. I would like to clarify, President Sandberg, do you want me to go through all of the details of the amendments like we did at Committee of the Whole, or do more of a synopsis? I just wanted to make sure I am meeting whatever expectations you have for these tonight.
What is the pleasure of the council? Is a synopsis sufficient to get us started? I'm seeing nods of approval, so if you can just maybe more briefly do the synopsis,
Sure.
I think that's preferred.
Okay, thank you so much. So the first one this evening is, as I said, Ordinance 2209. This went to the Plan Commission as ZO 1122 on March 14th and was recommended with a positive recommendation of 6-0. And this particular ordinance is zoning updates to Chapter 3, which is our use regulations. There are 8 amendments identified, and they largely deal with adjusting building floor plate maximums for multifamily and student housing or dormitory uses. So you can see that reflected in the red line that's in the packet, as well as the associated Excel document that highlights each by description only. So basically, what we were trying to do in this chapter with these brief amendments, one is to address the building floor plate maximums that currently exist in code. So these are for the use, student housing, or dormitory in our various multi-use districts. So the idea is to lower the base. And so a building floor plate maximum is going to be the size of a particular floor. And then obviously that has an effect on the bulk feeling of the building, which is something Councilperson Smith spoke about earlier, something that we hear about a lot. So the idea is to lower the by right size. And then if you decide to use one of our incentives, affordable housing incentive or sustainability incentive, the size increases. And then if you decide to use both, the maximum increases again. or in the case of the mixed-use student housing district, it goes back to the old incentive, which was no maximum at all if you use both. We also increased the separation of student housing developments in some of our, again, mixed-use districts. And we included some, some changes to building floor plate so that you, again, related to the incentives, so that buildings with more than 20 dwelling units have a limited floor plate. And then again, if they use incentives, that those maximums can, those floor plate maximums can be increased. So that is pretty much the focus of this chapter. And we did see it at committee of the whole. And I believe that this particular ordinance was 7-0. I can answer any questions.
Before we go to, do we have questions first before we hear an amendment? Okay, Councilmember Rollo.
Thank you, Ms. Scanlon. My question is, what is the typical size, floor plate size of a large development that, say, would be a typical one that we're experiencing problems perceiving too much mass?
Well, I think that's a good question. I would say we receive them, oh, excuse me. Yeah, sorry. I would say we receive complaints, based on how much of the buildings are visible from the roadway, and that massing is something that is important to people. I'm going to look up a building that we all know and give you the rough square footage to help answer that question. Just a quick second. If my computer will play along here. Oh, shoot. Hold on. So a building that we would receive complaints about that would be a large city block, for example, formerly named Smallwood, that building is going to be, not counting its punch outs on the inside that you can't see, is over 60,000 square feet. So a building that's quite large, obviously that's one of our larger buildings, is going to be larger than some of the maximums allowed, even with the incentives. So we still are looking for and aiming for smaller size buildings, just leaving the option in for developers to have an easier, larger build if they do the incentives.
Right, so it could be half the scale of Smallwood, but it would have to suffice in terms of housing and affordability and also sustainability metrics.
Correct. In some locations, yes.
Okay, in some locations. Okay,
yeah, so they're
thank you.
calibrated based on the district. So the smaller districts, for example, the mixed-use neighborhood scale, the largest the building floor plate could be is 5,000 square feet. That's still very small, but just trying to give a range to make the incentives more useful for the community.
Okay, thank you. That gives me a perspective. Thanks.
Oh.
What she just said, is floor plate the same thing as footprint of a building?
Yes.
Thank you.
It's not defined exactly like that, but yeah.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sims.
Thank you. And thank you again for the report. I think for the third time, maybe. But at any rate, Mr. Robinson, and either one of you can choose to answer this. I think it's pretty simple. But one of the reasons that we're bringing back these amendments, and you stated to recalibrate sustainability and affordability incentives. Can you tell me a little bit more what does that mean? Or what does that entail? And how have some of those incentives been recalibrated, I guess? Or what do you anticipate? Okay,
I'm happy to answer. I can't tell if Scott's standing up in there.
No, he's recuperating.
Okay, I'll say, and then he can correct or add on, which is basically that, since the UDO was whole cloth updated first in 2019, 2020, we what we said to the council and the community is that, we want to try these incentives and see if they work. And if they're not working in a way that we intend, which is to generate more affordable housing and more sustainable development design, then we'll want to try to change them to make that happen. So we came in with original numbers and maximums. We have seen very limited affordable housing incentive use, and we have seen some sustainability development incentive use. You will see that we will be proposing some changes to that as well. We think that the sustainable development incentives may be too lax, too easy to get, and that we're not really haven't been able to maximize for the community the benefits that they were intended for. So we're trying to find a new level where development will still be possible, of course, but that it will be more likely that the incentives would be used. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Other questions from council? Councilmember Flaherty.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Robinson, Ms. Scanlon. I wanted to follow up on a point from earlier in the evening with Mr. Smith's report, but actually something Ms. Scanlon just referenced as well, which is the way buildings are perceived by people in the public realm, so people on the street, that floor area ratio, or foot, whatever it's called, the building floor plate, sorry. Floor plate kind of gets at that, but you can have an area figured in a lot of different ways, whereas controlling the maximum facade or like building width gets more directly at what I think folks are concerned about when they talk about buildings that are out of scale and monotony. Is there a reason that we choose to go with floor plate versus regulating something like maximum building widths?
Sure. I think initially the reason that we've done that thus far, we have definitely discussed widths. That is something I think that we could do. I think we started with building floor plate on recommendation of the consultants that we use to help update the code, who update codes across the country. And I think that's where we kind of came in with the idea of building floor plate. And then, yeah, I do think widths are something we could and maybe should explore in the future.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Robinson, you have something to add?
Scanlon can correct me, but kind of to rewind to prior to this UDO, a lot of the activity we saw in the downtown, which, do have those architectural controls where we didn't see as much outside of the city. There was a really, the growth policies plan really directed growth in the downtown. We're in a different time now. And so with the floor plate, we hope to address that. We do have some limited kind of design and outside of the downtown, but the character overlay areas do maintain those kind of facade treatments and what have you. So I just wanted to provide that for context. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, seeing no questions, we now go to the public for any comments. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
I wanted to introduce Amendment 1 to Ordinance 2209.
Yes, please.
And this amendment just corrects 2 typographical errors in the text.
All right. Any questions from council? Councilmember Volan, got a hot mic here.
Have we ever considered a consent agenda process for handling amendments that would be like technical changes? I mean, is it possible under the UDO or the Plan Commission process, for us considering things like this, that in the future we don't actually have to have a separate vote on each set of technical corrections?
Yes, that's a process that the council has used. I think given the limited number of these types of amendments, we didn't consider that. It might be just as fast to go through them in the council's typical manner.
I didn't know if there was any kind of new restriction that we need to be concerned about. Thank you.
No.
All right, any other questions regarding Amendment 1? And seeing none, do we need to go to the public? No one here in chambers? All right, very good. Let us call the question on Amendment 1. If the clerk would please call the roll.
Yes. Sims? Yes. Scambalori?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
Rallo?
Yes.
Flaherty? Yes. Smith?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Rosenbarger? Yes. Thank you.
That passes. So we are now back to the ordinance 22-9. And where do we leave off? Was it public comment? Do we see any hands raised?
See no hands raised at the moment. If folks on Zoom would like to comment on ordinance 2209 as amended, now's your opportunity to do so. Please use the raise hand feature to indicate that you'd like to speak.
While we are waiting, our next opportunity is to come back to council for any final comment or questions. And seeing no final comments, Councilmember Flaherty.
Sorry, this is on the ordinance as a whole, yes, as amended. Yeah, just a brief note to say, first of all, thank you. I appreciate staff's work on this and support the iterative approach to considering incentives and trying to update those and tweak those over time based on what we're seeing. So definitely appreciate that. Just wanted to plug again the idea of maximum building widths, possibly as an additional layer to help control monotony, as that's the real driver of what a pedestrian sees, or really anyone on the street for that matter. And that even with these kind of reduced sizes, with an odd-shaped lot, you could still end up with a very wide but shallow building that kind of does the thing that I think we're trying to avoid with these standards. So you could set, you know, half a block, half a normal city block, 150 feet or so as an upper limit, even when you're taking advantage of incentives, and reduce that to 100 feet, you know, without them, or 75 feet without them. For context, the Smallwood building, formerly called Smallwood, is almost 300 feet long. The Graham building on the corner of the square is about 88 feet wide. Sorry, and when I said Smallwood building, same thing, 280 feet wide. So anyway, something to consider, but I appreciate the changes, and I'll be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
The ordinance, rather.
Councilmember Rallo.
Yeah, just to say, I think this is a step in the right direction, but I like my colleague, feel that more needs to be done, and I think building widths is a good approach. Clearly, what we're lacking is, what we're experiencing is large mass. This is a remedy to cap it and then allow it to be larger with, certain incentives, sustainable and otherwise. And then the other is to separate the buildings as well, to put larger separation. But I think that fails to really get a human-scaled landscape that's the consequence of large building mass. So we're going the right way, but I think more needs to be done, especially when it comes to architectural features as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, I would just like to say that, yes, if the incentives that we currently have written in the ODO are just simply not working, especially with respect to the affordability factor, we need to do everything possible to tweak that and make sure we're getting what we want. I do find a certain irony, because every time I drive by Verve, which is under construction and near my house on the north side, I look to that and I don't see, the words don't come to mind, sustainability or affordability, as I'm driving past those. And then I'm also thinking about the public outcry about what they're seeing popping up in the built environment, and they're going, oh my God, this is massive, this is huge, and this is a little bit, I think, out of what many people have envisioned when we talk about the need for density that's going to hopefully bring price points down, the need for us to be more mindful of climate change and our efforts to act on the things we need to act on to make sure our community is environmentally protected. I just wish there were other incentives that we could offer other than giving them more floors or giving them more of a floor plate rather, to try to get to the goals that are all noble, that we all support: sustainability, environmental stewardship, and affordability. I just don't know that it's going in that direction. And, you know, if the developers are not nibbling at the incentive tools that we have out there, what more can be done without having to give them additional floor space and additional levels that are a little bit alarming to folks as they're seeing some things being built. So, anyone else with a final comment? Councilmember Volin.
Just politely point out that that same project that when it was approved was the largest development in Bloomington to date, was also approved under the PUD process, and in that negotiation, the developer agreed to fund an entire bus route in perpetuity to the tune of at least $140,000 a year. So I think that says two things. One is, you know, while we agreed to greatly reduce the use of PUDs, and a lot of them had to go, I know that Councilmember Rallo and I have both remarked on the utility of the PUD process to enable such negotiations. And I thought that when the project that was once known as Brownstone Terrace was negotiated, we no longer had the ability to get them to reduce parking and to increase public transit, which they were in an excellent position to do, being between Verve and IU. But the other matter is that one person's horror at a tall building is another person's, oh, that's fine, we need more density. I don't know that everybody in Bloomington objects in particular to the size of that building. And I do agree with the observation tonight that building widths ought to be a greater concern than building heights. And I keep coming back to the building that I pointed out to more than one person today, a building that is very tall and ought to be indignantly pointed at by any number of people for its height, but no one objects to because it's the Graham Hotel on the northwest corner of the square. It's a beautiful building that's 9 stories tall, but it has a small footprint, and maybe we've been upset with the wrong things for a while, that maybe extra floors aren't the issue. It's the massing of a building like Evolve or Smallwood, the sheer width of it combined with its height. That's a bigger issue. But I would urge my colleagues and the public not to be so quick to criticize height, because that is a key to providing housing. It's just not necessarily the housing that some of us, many of whom live in, and including me, live in single-family homes, necessarily want or need. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, if that concludes council comments, will the clerk please call the roll on Ordinance 22-09 as amended?
Yes, Councilmember Sims?
Yes.
Scambalori?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
Rallo?
Yes.
Flaherty?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Rosenbarger?
Yes.
Volin?
Yes.
Thank you. 900, that passes.
Madam President, I move that Ordinance 2210 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Will the clerk please read?
Resolution 2210 to amend Title 20 of the Bloomington Municipal Code regarding technical corrections set forth in Bloomington Municipal Code 20.04. The synopsis is as follows. This petition contains amendments related to design requirements for uses allowed in the code. These amendments add, remove, or edit existing text to clarify and amend standards. There are 21 amendments identified. Your committee recommendation was due pass 502, and for Amendment 1, it was due pass 502.
Thank you.
I move that ordinance 2210 be adopted.
Second.
All right, and again, Ms. Scanlon, are you with us? And will you just
Yep.
provide a synopsis again?
Great, thank you. So ordinance 2210 was seen by the Plan Commission as Plan Commission case ZO1222 at the March meeting, March 2022 meeting as well. It was recommended with a positive recommendation with a vote of 501. So this particular ordinance is related to Chapter 4 of Title 20, which is our Development Standards and Incentives chapter. Ms. Bolden said there are 21 amendments, and they have a pretty wide range. So I'll just briefly go over them. One is a change to the dimensional standards table in order to align some of the dimensional standards related to the hospital development plan area with some of the desired outcomes of that plan. So changes to some impervious surface coverage and setbacks for that area. We also have added some particular cross-references that may have been needed, things that existed in other parts of Chapter 4, adding those to tables as well for clarity. And then some other clarifying changes, adding new language into existing regulations just to clarify what they mean. One, for example, discussing entrances or driveways and their width maximums for single family or plex uses, and adding in some language to clarify that that's in the entirety of the front yard, so between the building and roadway. Adding some clarifying language related to stub streets in subdivisions. We are proposing to remove the minimum parking for plexes in those districts in which multifamily doesn't have minimum parking. So when the original rules were written, the rules for the plexes were actually more stringent. So not in the R1 through R4 districts, but in the mixed use or more intense residential districts, again, where multifamily uses don't have minimum parking. So taking that out. We also added in architectural requirements for multifamily uses that was missing. Some solar ready building requirements have been added for new construction of primary structures. And then we worked with the urban forester on some changes to the permitted street tree list. We had some questions at committee related to the removal of maples. I think I said at committee and then was able to confirm that the reason that those are being removed is because we do have a proliferation of maples in our public tree inventory. And so as a way to promote diversity as well as protect those trees were we to get some sort of disease of maples, we are just taking those out. And that's something that could maybe be put back in at another time. Additionally, we had a question about the London plane tree, which I believe my understanding is a cross between, yes, a non-native, but also a native sycamore, which is I think why it was included. And then there was a question about whether or not we could put in a particular condition for the elm trees that are being asked to be put back in related to more specific disease resistant. Based on the way that the code currently is written, Stephen can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that we think that amendment can go in now, but that's something we will add to 2023 and work with. If this is approved, we will work with landscapers to make sure that's being done even before it is codified. So yeah, others were just some correction or more specificity again included in places, for example, different mechanical equipment types. And then we did some clarification of where projecting signs, projecting 5 square foot, projecting signs could be located, which is something we've been getting a lot more requests for on multi-tenant centers and wasn't previously allowed. And then also putting in more allowance for a larger sign than 300 square feet, which is the typical max. So allowing to go up to 400 for buildings that are quite large, for example, Bloomington South or the Catalent building. So those are addressing variances we've seen since the code was updated. And I can answer any questions on this or the staff amendment that we proposed.
Very much. I understand we have 3 amendments for this one. Do we want to proceed to those or go to council questions first? No council questions, so Amendment 1, do we have?
Yes, I can go over that. So Amendment 1 is, oh, I'm sorry, is Councilperson Smith supposed to do that?
Councilmember Smith, are you going to introduce Amendment 1?
Pardon me. I'd like to introduce Amendment 1. It was being introduced at a request of the planning staff. This is on Chapter 4.
I'll second it.
Thank you.
All right, that's been moved, so we can now discuss Amendment 1.
Okay, I'll give a brief synopsis. So basically, this was, as we said in the committee meeting, just an error on my part when compiling the documents. This is the last section of Chapter 4, and it was just left out. So this is our changes, proposed changes to the incentives section, which we mentioned earlier briefly. A couple of the bigger things, we are proposing to remove the need for the linkage study in student housing or dormitory use outside of the downtown area. This is, as we've said and said at committee, trying to find a balance for the incentives to be at one time desirable for developers and also for the city to be getting good benefit from those. And we haven't seen much positive use of the linkage study thus far. We're proposing to take that out. We are also proposing to slightly increase the development bulk incentives in the affordable housing section, and amending the current payment in lieu options, again, in the affordable housing section. And then in the sustainable development section, we are kind of reorganizing the way it's written. So a lot of the same standards, but increasing some of the minimums. And additionally, instead of being able to qualify for 4 of the 6, we will be requiring meeting all 6 if you'd like to achieve or get the, be able to utilize that incentive. And then the last part is, if you are doing the affordable housing incentive and then you choose to add on the sustainable development bonus, we broke that up by tier, which the affordable housing incentives already are listed in 2 tiers, tier 1 and tier 2. And so then we broke up the additional sustainable development bonus to mirror those tiers. Again, encouraging people to use the incentives that help the lower AMI groups, which are in tier 2. So that is kind of the gist of that, and I can answer any questions.
Thank you. Any council questions? Councilmember Flaherty.
Yes, thank you for the presentation on that amendment. I wanted to ask more about the proposed changes to the payment in lieu section of the affordable housing incentives. If memory serves, through the course of the UDO being developed and discussed, one theme that came up was general discomfort among the public and some council members of the kind of perception of I hesitate to say the phrase because I don't want to bring this notion back, but the idea that developers are choosing not to include affordable units within the development itself, but instead making a payment as a substitute. And that was, again, sort of frowned upon by a number of folks. And this change at the time was to really discourage that practice and saying payment in lieu can only be used if these 3 criteria, one of the 3 is met, such as somehow concentrating very low and low income housing, that sort of thing. Because again, when we have payment in lieu, we have to spend that somewhere else, usually on something that is a lot of affordable housing in one place, whereas the theory seemed to be it would be better to integrate that with market rate housing in more cohesively. So I guess I'm wondering what motivated this change, given the somewhat recent, shift when the UDO was developed.
And Ms. Scanlon, Mr. Robinson is approaching the podium.
Thank you, Ms.
Thanks for the question, Councilmember Flaherty. And again, this is based on our assessment of requests that we're getting in. Most of the developments are currently opting for the sustainability rather than even having we're not even having conversations with affordability. So these amendments, along with the prior ordinance, we're trying to align those so that the way that I explained it at a committee of the whole is that you could do either sustainability or affordability. You get a little bump. Don't get a big bump. Right now, you get a big bump with either or. If you do both, you get a much bigger bump. And so the idea behind, at least in this regard to the linkage study, that's something that typically people here don't do. It seems to be more common practice elsewhere. Our consultant said, oh, they're easy to do. There was some questions about that. So at this point in time, again, we're trying to create opportunities so that we can leverage more tools to help subsidize affordable housing. Housing costs are increasing, as everybody knows. 180 to 120 is kind of the bracket that we're looking at through the UDO. There's a proposed change on the AMI. When you start getting below that kind of 90 to 80%, that's where federal programs, low-income housing tax credit programs start kicking in, and we start dealing with a much different developer, that their mission focused is affordable housing, and they're not going to pursue the payment in lieu and the things that we have in the UDO. So we're, again, trying to look at ways that we could help sweeten the pot for the affordability. We've created the Housing Development Fund. We're in constant conversations on how do we monitor and deal with that. So that's kind of the nexus of that is, again, just evaluating what we're seeing as a way to kind of help improve that, because we have not had much success with those conversations in developers. I believe Mr. Zodi from HAND is available via Zoom if you have questions on the Housing Development Fund. But thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe a follow-up or two. So my understanding is there's not really a revenue source for the Housing Development Fund right now. Is part of the motivation to kind of reinstate an option to have revenue for that fund? Is that what I understood?
Yeah, and again, it's targeting the developments that are defined as student housing, just to be clear. And so again, these are the type of projects that we're generally seeing, and how do we leverage that housing engine to help kind of provide other benefits to the community. It's common practice everywhere. We enabled it with the current UDO. It's just there's additional strings attached to that. So again, that's kind of what we assess would be a good option to consider. Thanks.
But maybe last question, if that's okay, related. Have you heard specifically from folks looking to develop properties that they would like this option as opposed to what's available currently? Like, have people been asking for this, or lamenting its absence in the last few years?
Yes. Specifically, no, but I think prior to the adoption of this, we have examples, as Mr. Volan brought up, of people still entering the PUD process, which had different rules, that there was interest to do payment in lieu and other payments. So I think we do have experience that that's there. It's just right now the way the standards are set up, it's really favoring sustainability, which is good. But again, I think we'd like to get a win-win on affordability and sustainability.
And I see that Mr. Zodi has popped up on the screen. Mr. Zodi from HAND, did you have a comment on one of the questions that was just posed?
No, President Sandberg, just happy to answer questions. Councilmember Flaherty asked about the revenue source. There isn't a consistent revenue source for the Housing Development Fund. As many of you know, it is, we get contributions in there through various means. We'll be expecting one this summer, later this summer. The Verve that a couple of you mentioned a few minutes ago is doing a payment in lieu there, so we will see some revenue come into the Housing Development Fund. As all of you will expect, we'll do a report on the activity of the Housing Development Fund at the end of the year, as is provided by the ordinance. So happy to answer any other questions about it, but just wanted to be available tonight as you move through these changes.
Thank you. And I believe Mr. Rollo had a question?
No, it was answered, actually. Thank you.
Councilmember Scambolari.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Robinson or Ms. Scanlon, and I'll defer to the two of you. I need your help understanding some of the proposed changes to the payment in lieu of section. And as I read your proposed changes, it removes the Plan Commission from that conversation. It says affordability criteria, blah, blah, may be authorized by the Plan Commission if it is determined that, and then there are criteria listed. That's being replaced with an agreement with the city, and all payments will be deposited into the housing. Could you speak to, help me understand better the desirability and the rationale for removing the Plan Commission from that equation? Does that question make sense?
Wilson is approaching the podium.
Okay.
Ms. Scanlon may need to help me because I don't have the ordinance in front of me. Because the way it's structured now, they'd have to do the linkage study and they'd have to get the approval from the Plan Commission for the payment in lieu to be in place. Because we're changing that, that's why that code or that requirement would be there, is that we just give them the option to do payment into the Housing Development Fund. That the petition or request still would go before the Plan Commission, and they'd still have to meet the criterias of the affordability requirements and the other standards. So it's not like they get a free pass and nobody reviews the petition. It's only in regards to the linkage study and the payment in lieu options.
Okay, so we removed the linkage study, but it's still, the Plan Commission still has that role in the process.
Yes, they will still be reviewing the site plan and compliance for UDO.
Great, I understand better. Thank you.
Anyone else? Council questions? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, I just want to clarify. Mr. Robinson said, mentioned that this payment in lieu change is actually, and maybe I misunderstood, just applies to student housing, but this section is all about the incentives, so it would be for any kind of housing, right? Did I just mishear that, Mr. Robinson?
Again, my apologies, I may have misspoke. I didn't have the ordinance right in front of me, so in reviewing that, that would be correct. But again, the types of stuff that we're seeing, that most of these conversations we're having with our developments that are typically student housing type developments. So by definition, some of the projects that we're seeing, they're not meeting that definition, so it would still capture those. But Ms. Scanlon, I don't know if you can.
No, I think that's correct. What the payment in lieu is just for anyone seeking to use the affordable housing incentives. What we've seen in practice thus far is that most of that has been student housing defined when we're using incentives, period, thus far.
Okay, so would it be accurate to say that, so we're not getting developers to consider affordable housing enough, given the current payment in lieu requires certain conditions be met. And so the staff figures that if we make the payment in lieu a little bit easier, at least we would get some more funds to subsidize affordable housing elsewhere. Is that kind of the strategy?
Yes, I think so. So, sorry, I didn't know yours. Go ahead, Mr. Robinson.
Yeah, that's correct. And again, kind of related to the discussion on committee of the whole is, how do we monitor, the units? And so that's something that we're in conversation, because that's an important piece to implementation. Obviously, the programs within the low housing tax credit programs, they're kind of easy to identify and monitor. And again, in coordination with HAND and Bloomington Housing Authority, we're in those conversations of how do we go out and monitor the units that are being developed to make sure that they are meeting those standards, that they are aware, the public's aware that these units are available. And so again, that's a concern that I think some developers maybe not explicitly have said. I do know that in conversations that I had with the Trinitas Kmart site, they didn't want to manage, their business model is not managing affordable housing. They don't want to market them. They don't want to manage them. They're not interested. They'd be happy to hire somebody else to do it. And so again, I think that's a piece of the equation that we need to be realistic about, is that if you're getting a market rate developer that's their program is only about, producing housing, and you're asking them to incorporate it, it sounds great, but then they're taking on a management piece that they're maybe not familiar with, and we're looking at this as a way to help maybe address that they have that option available. There might be some out there that are willing to do both, but again, we're just trying to create more opportunity here with that. I hope that answers your questions. Yeah, thanks.
Any additional question from council? And seeing no questions on Amendment 1, we go to the public, if there are any public comments.
Zoom, if you'd like to comment on Amendment 1, you can use the raise hand feature. I think I've seen a few new folks come in on Zoom, so I'll just remind folks you can find that under in your control bar under either the reactions button or the more button. If you're not able to locate the raise hand button, please send a chat to the meeting host and we can recognize you that way. And I do see one hand raised currently.
Certainly.
John Lawrence should be able to unmute now.
Okay, yes, it's unmuting now. This is actually Jan Sorby calling in, and I wondered about how HAND is monitoring at this time the apartments that have taken on that burden of having affordable units. I have one that's close to my house, and they do have affordable units within it. And I just wondered how that is monitored. A few years ago, they did not have a monitoring system in place. And so I was wondering if there has been one put in place, and if perhaps one could be put in place that would be easier for developers to utilize. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sorby. Anyone else from the public? We come back to council for any final comments on Amendment 1. Or, Councilmember Smith.
Thank Mr. Robinson, Ms. Scanlon, and everybody else in planning and transportation for working on the incentives. We certainly have to try different things to try to achieve our goals. So I just want to thank everybody for doing all that work. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we do any more final comment, I might want to just ask, I don't know if Mr. Zodi is with us still, if we could answer the question that was posed about how affordability units are monitored currently. Do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. Thanks, President Sandberg, and thanks to Ms. Sorby for asking the question. We do monitor that, and let me just give you a quick summary of where HAND's level of activity there is. We're in the process of sort of rounding out the setup of the program. So we started last year talking about how we could do this, and we have, luckily, with the support of the council and the community, developed quite a few units of affordable housing, about 1,100 plus units of affordable housing over the last 6 years. And so question then becomes, okay, how do we make sure those are in place? And a number of them, about half of those are still under construction or awaiting completion, or they've been approved, but close to 500 or so are done. And so we've put a process in place at the first of this year where we sent a communication to all the properties who have those units, who agreed to have affordable units, or through some of their program have affordable units in place in their property. We asked for that communication to come back to us at the end of March. We heard back from some, not all, as you might suspect. It's just a communication as it goes. And so we have finished the outreach to all of those. We are largely seeing compliance, that people have the units in place that they agreed to. And so now our next step is to, and the units I'm talking about, let me be clear, the 1,100 plus. Those are sort of the private investment. So not necessarily the Bloomington Housing Authority and other housing that gets a lot of public dollars, but private investment that has maybe gotten some public dollars, or just private affordable housing developers. So what we need to do next is sort of make sure that all of our affordable housing is in line. So you've got projects that are through private investment, projects with home dollars, and home is the source out of HUD, the Home Investment Partnership Program. You've got projects, as Mr. Robinson mentioned, that are low-income housing tax credit projects, that have their own and completely separate compliance system with the state of Indiana, with IHCDA. And so we want to make sure that all those affordable housing types are done in sort of a cohesive program. So what we're trying to do now on an annual basis, and this will be the first year that we do that, is ask those who have affordable housing units on their property to report to us by a certain time. We think we're going to get notice about out this summer about having a July or an October reporting date, so that we can make this an annual basis, because there are, as I mentioned, cyclical inspections, cyclical reporting that some of these properties already do to other entities. And so we want to make sure that we're having that process sort of streamlined, so that they're not having to report to a bunch of different entities, but we can make it sort of a cohesive program. So we're very active in doing that now. And it's been a busy spring working to make sure that those units are where they're committed to be. And so we feel good about where we are with compliance, and we're excited about the units that are coming online. Those over 600 that I mentioned are either approved or under construction. We'll break ground soon on the Retreat at Switchyard project, the 48 units of affordable housing down on South Walnut Street. That'll break ground next month. And so we're rolling along with affordable housing.
Thank you for that
Happy to answer any
clarification.
further questions there.
Thank you. If there's nothing more from council on Amendment 1, we will call the question and ask for the clerk to call the roll.
Yes.
Sandberg? Rallo?
Yes.
Flaherty?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Rosenbarger?
Yes.
Volan?
Yes.
Sims?
Yes.
Thank you. Amendment 1 passes 9-0-0, and we are now ready to, I believe, hear another amendment. Is that Amendment 2? This is from Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, I will move Amendment 2 to Ordinance 2210. And I believe this one is, again, just typographical corrections.
Okay, very good. Any questions about those typos? Any public comment?
Going up for comment on Amendment 2, no.
All right, back to council. And if there are no further comments, will the clerk please call the roll on Amendment 2?
Yes. Councilmember Sandberg?
Yes.
Rallo?
Yes.
Flaherty?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Rosenbarger?
Yes.
Volan?
Yes.
Sims?
Yes.
And Scambalori.
Yes.
Thank you. Amendment 2 passes. And now we were on to Amendment 3, and this is Councilmember Flaherty.
I'd like to move, we pass amendment, or adopt Amendment 3 to Ordinance 2210.
Second.
Okay.
Yeah, happy to present the amendment. This amendment would remove 3 notes from table, 3 proposed new notes from Table 043 Mixed Use District Dimensional Standards. These 3 notes propose to carve out a geographic area that corresponds with the proposed Hopewell development and apply a different set of standards. Specifically for the mixed-use medium-scale zoning district within the Hopewell geography, the text would increase impervious surface coverage maximum to 85%, reduce the minimum landscape area to 15%, and set minimum side and rear building setbacks to 0 feet. One reason that I'm proposing removing these 3 notes is because they set out to change zoning district standards for a specific geographic area based on the unique characteristics of that area. Elsewhere in the UDO, we do this exact thing through zoning overlays, which I believe is a more appropriate and logical approach here as well. By way of comparison, with our 6 downtown character overlays, we tweak and adjust the following things for designated geographic areas based on their unique context: impervious surface coverage maximum, front, side, and rear setbacks, primary and accessory structure height, etc. A second reason that I think these issues are better suited for a zoning overlay is that there are other changes that are justified in Hopewell beyond what is proposed here based on its unique characteristics, including parking minimums and maximums. As we all know well, there is a 6-level parking garage on the proposed Hopewell site. We will inherit that asset as the site transitions from hospital to neighborhood. And it would seem to me like a very poor policy choice to mandate a minimum amount of parking be built when you already have a large parking garage next door. But that would be the current outcome based on the UDO. The UDO already invokes zoning overlays in order to adjust minimum parking requirements in similar contexts, specifically in the downtown core and downtown square character areas, which are exempted from parking minimums. We could do the same thing with a Hopewell overlay. So given the existence of the hospital parking garage, the location on transit lines and on the B line, and proximity to amenities, that site is ideal for an ideal location to revisit parking minimums. And I guess in sum, there are, I think, quite a few changes, including some of the ones proposed here, that are indeed warranted in the mixed-use medium and possibly mixed-use neighborhood scale zoning districts within the Hopewell site's geography based on the administration's master plan. I just think we should tackle those numerous issues cohesively and comprehensively in a zoning overlay, and I would appreciate your support for the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I might ask if the staff have any comments on Amendment 3. Either Ms. Scanlon?
Sure, I can make a couple, and then Director Robinson can correct or add on, as always. Yes, that is something that we explored, various options of how to do this type of change in the code. So I think we do acknowledge that it could be done in another way. The overlays that we have now currently, it's just one overlay over the downtown, and then it's split into different districts in that overlay. We used to, in the old code, call them out all separately. And in the new code, it's one overlay over the entirety of the mixed use downtown, and then that entire zoning district is in the overlay and split up by section for the different requirements. So this is a little different in that we're not proposing changes for the entirety of the mixed use medium scale, only a quite small portion. And so when we were determining the best way to kind of put that in here, it was determined by staff that amending these tables would provide the outcome that we were looking for to align with the design outcomes of the plan for the hospital redevelopment. And we do, address some other issues via footnote in these types of tables, as you can see in your packet. So we felt that was appropriate. Mr. Robinson can add anything I've left out.
Anything? I see a thumbs up from Mr. Robinson. He's approaching the podium.
I guess the only thing that I would add is during the UDO amendment or UDO update process with Clarion, we've had a lot of conversations about overlay districts, and as Ms. Scanlon described, in the old code they were separate, and now they're kind of enveloped in one zoning district. There's certainly a tool to use, overlay districts, but repeatedly, Clarion Associates advised us not to do them. They kind of conveyed that they're kind of used as maybe an easy way to create something that should be a unique, it's like change the standards or create a different zone rather than creating a lot of overlays. Generally now they seem to use more for hazard mitigation, historic preservation. So again, I think, in the spirit of, our willingness to continue to tweak the UDO, these are pretty minor in the scope of of a very specific area within the city. The UDO does have a map that is also could be considered an overlay, but it's not. It talks about the limitation of residential and non-residential uses on specific block faces in the downtown. Not everywhere in the downtown, specific. So it's not, this is not unique alone to how we've approached maybe some very targeted focus tweaks to standards in the UDO. But again, certainly hope that council supports staff's amendments in recognizing that it is very focused on a very specific area and not the entirety of all of the Hopewell neighborhood, just specifically within the MM, mixed-use medium, properties that the city will soon own. That gives the city a lot more leverage and control on how to work with proposals and developers as opposed to if these were in control of a non-public agency where we wouldn't have that luxury, I guess, to say. So certainly happy to have a conversation at another time about overlay districts and other things, and happy to answer any other questions. But again, I think in regards to this amendment, I ask that council not support that and support the staff amendment. Thank you.
Council questions regarding Amendment 3. Councilmember Boland.
Yes, I'd like to ask Mr. Flaherty to elaborate, first of all, on some of the, to repeat some of the suggestions he had for what also would go into a would-be overlay zone, and are they anything other than parking?
I think I haven't done that level of comprehensive review of options. I think your question for me invokes a question that I have for city staff, actually, which is that after these proposed changes, if they go through, does staff expect to be able to develop the entire Hopewell site by right, or will there be other tweaks and changes needed over time, or variances or other things given to allow the site to develop in line with their plans? I guess, in other words, did they anticipate other things coming?
Well, actually, that is exactly the question I'd like to pose Mr. Robinson. It's an interesting question I've never thought of before. Is it the city's intent to make parcels in Hopewell developable by right as a result of the city's actions?
Well, again, I can't answer the question specifically by right. It's in the possession of the city, and again, the city will be in negotiations with interested parties. Typically what the city does is issue RFIs, requests for information, not RFPs, to negotiate with interested parties on parcels. Again, the entire site, the city purchase agreement, I believe, is somewhere around 24 or 25 acres. It's not the entirety of the Hopewell neighborhood.
Right.
Once the city has possession of those properties, it gives us a good position to negotiate those agreements. They'll still have to go before Plan Commission and other things. And I will say pace. Our experience with the Trades District, we're not seeing a lot of activity. I don't expect that, this is the only chance that the city, this administration, this council has the ability to shape Hopewell as it moves forward.
Yeah, I get it. It wasn't a well-formed question, but I appreciate the answer. So let me then ask you about these three particular points. Were these the only ideas that you thought about? You felt that these were the only things you wanted to get done? It was easier to just put it in here as sort of an exception? Were there, I guess I don't know how to phrase it, but did you consider at all, for example, Mr. Flaherty's point about parking minimums and maximums in Hopewell?
I will say we've had conversations about how to utilize the garage internally. As you know, the garage is currently enshrined in a demolition zone for the next couple of years, so there is a pace of which we can have that conversation. I will also say that, in reviewing the process for the platting for Phase 1 East, the public improvements and plan, both for the roadway improvements, the infrastructure improvements planned on First Street and Second Street. The assessment of trying to balance both the goals of affordability, the goals of sustainability, the goals of how much land do we actually have to try to achieve that. That is why that we only looked at tweaking the impervious surface coverage. I'm not finished, Mr. Boland, just for a second, Councilman Boland. The fact that there are both planned and planned improvements, both for here and other areas where we've addressed maybe some balancing or recalibrating to the impervious surface coverage with the greenway, on-site stormwater management, and things where it felt like that could be a good trade-off in this instance. So no, that's why we didn't consider changes to parking and other things.
And yet, I have to ask, I mean, why would we continue to require a minimum parking standard in an area that we know is going to be very dense? That the administration is saying they want, a dense population in. Why wouldn't we eliminate parking minimums at the same time that we do these other changes?
I think at this point now, I would honestly say I can't say there's consensus among both Plan Commission and Common Council on that statement. For me to bring that forward, I'm just being frank and honest, I need to have some commitment by you as a body that that's the desire of this commission to implement that policy change. I would rather prefer to work with RFI proposals, work with the negotiations on those purchase agreements to see how we can minimize those on-site parking needs so that they can offset those with either, car sharing, other ways to utilize the parking structure and what have you. I do know that when we were working with the core building and the RFI that we issued with that, there was a lot of discussion about on-site parking in the garage and the willingness and ability for the city to actually build a road within that site. And that was one of their main concerns, is building the infrastructure in order for folks to get to the parking structure. So we certainly had those conversations, but I can't say there's consensus amongst all the different decision-making bodies in that.
Well, I certainly can agree with you that there may not be consensus, but I'm a little surprised that we're still talking, using phrases like parking needs. There's demand and supply. If we don't supply so much parking, maybe it actually brings down the cost of purchasing a unit in that area because it's not as convenient as a place that has a parking space. Why are we still talking about parking needs instead of demand and supply? I mean, do you believe that anyone really has a need for parking except maybe somebody with a handicap placard?
Well, first of all, you're asking my philosophical
Maybe.
beliefs. Yes, I would agree with you philosophically that I don't agree that there is a need, but I also recognize that needs amongst our community are vast and wide, and I don't want to be able to artificially hinder that option right out of the gate for the first developer that might knock on the door that they don't have that option available. So I think, again, I'd like to look at this as a pilot. And again, the amendment before you is not talking about the overlay. It's really talking about impervious surface changes to the code. Happy to have conversations beyond tonight about how to develop overlays or other things to consider with Hopewell.
I appreciate that, and let me wrap up my statement that I recognize everything you say. I simply still would say what you call a parking need, I call a parking demand. And when we say need, it means that we have to build it at all costs. So with that, I thank you for your answers.
Yeah, I just actually wanted to continue to answer Councilmember Boland's question. So the parking minimums, certainly, just looking at the mixed-use medium scale district dimensional standards, I note too that 4 stories is the primary structure height maximum, not to exceed 50 feet. There might be reason for all or parts of that to be different within the Hopewell neighborhood as well, in particular adjacent to the parking garage, which I believe is taller than that. It would make sense to perhaps consider matching that height, for instance. So I think there are other considerations besides parking, which I mentioned earlier, that merit unique consideration within this geographic space.
Additional questions? Councilmember Rollo.
Just a specific question about what is the capacity of that garage that we're inheriting? Just plus or minus 50 or 100?
Thanks for the question, Councilmember Rollo. I honestly don't know off the top of my head. I want to say it's in the neighborhood of 300 spaces, just give or take. I can look at my email and maybe respond later if I find the exact number.
Ms. Scanlon,
Thank you.
do you have anything in front of you that would answer that? Okay.
I don't.
Thank you.
I'll look in the plan and see if it's in there.
Any other questions? All right, if there are no further council questions for amendment, Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
The master plan for the hospital site redevelopment, and it says the existing IU Health parking garage on 2nd Street has 480 spaces.
Lowballed. So if there are no further questions for either Councilmember Flaherty or staff on Amendment 3, we will go to the public for any comments. Do we see any raised hands?
If you'd like to comment, use the raise hand feature. This is public comment on Amendment 3 to Ordinance 2210.
And as we are possibly waiting, we will be coming back to council for any final comments on Amendment 3. Councilmember Flaherty.
Yes, I just wanted to note a couple points. First, on the feedback that the consultant advised that we don't create an overlay or try to minimize those, I would submit that we're sort of doing that anyway with this workaround. Without calling it an overlay, we're kind of doing things an overlay does. So I guess I don't see how that advice of theirs holds up in this context. And it seems to me like a less transparent and cohesive way to tackle a suite of issues related to that geographic area. Just specifically with respect to parking minimums, again, what we're not talking about limiting parking or parking maximums even. We're talking about not mandating that people build more or build some amount when we have this asset next door. There are a number of reasons why that makes sense here, not just the garage, but again, access to transit, multimodal infrastructure, and amenities. And I think a good example of that is a place near where I live, what used to be called the Bicycle Apartments. I forget what they're called now, southwest corner of 4th and Madison. Some of the more affordable housing in the greater downtown area, and they had to get a special exception when it was built for people to sign. I think they still have to sign a release that they don't have a vehicle or something like that because there was no parking built. That was the whole idea. But that's allowed those units to be incredibly affordable, especially as they age, because all of the land is being used for housing, and folks don't have to. It allows a deeper level of affordability, and I think that's something we really need to be considering in this context, and that would pair very well with the types of changes that are proposed in these notes, impervious surface, setbacks, et cetera. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, I support this amendment. I think that an overlay district for the Hopewell former hospital site is a good idea. We do have a master plan that was adopted by the administration for this site, but it never came to the city council, and I think this is a good opportunity to consider what the master plan says, consider what Plan Commission has discussed. Of course, an overlay would heavily involve the Plan Commission. But to come to some consensus of how to implement this master plan and the vision for the site, given our current regulations, it just makes sense to view the site comprehensively, including parking, including maximum impervious surface, including setbacks, and possibly also the alleys that we had talked about a month ago. that can increase connectivity on any site, and that we did not see as a foundational matter in the master plan for the site. So these are all questions I think that should be considered together, rather than having a footnote approved tonight and then later on talking about parking and later on talking about other things related. So I do think I would agree with Councilmember Flaherty, although he didn't use this term, but in some ways it's just a matter of semantics of we're calling something an overlay or not. I mean, I would argue we already have 5 or 6 overlays downtown, even though technically maybe they're one, but the one has 5 or 6 sections to it. So really, it's more than one overlay. So with all due respect to Clarion and the amount of experience they have, I would say this is an ideal place for an overlay. So I'm going to support the amendment. Thank you.
Anyone else? Well, I want to thank Councilmember Flaherty for bringing this forward. I do think it's a very important property that we are taking a look at when we are thinking about Hopewell and the once in a blue moon opportunity to really do something good here. And so I fully support the idea of an overlay, and thank you for bringing this to our attention this evening. Anyone else? Councilmember Bowen.
Yeah, I also wanted to point out that unique to this area of town is that we're looking at 25 to 27 acres of land that will be literally owned by the city, not just a neighborhood that we'd like to see something happen, and something that we collectively will be able to decide what will happen. Yes, of course, there's going to be mostly private developers who develop. The city itself does not develop many buildings. But the whole point, the whole prospect of Hopewell, the reason why it excites the community as it does is because here's a chance to remake the community in the image we want it to be, to fulfill the meaning of our comprehensive plan. And the administration's already taken several important steps that you can see in the design for Hopewell, namely they've reinstituted streets in the city grid. We've been having discussion about reinstituting alleys as well. But this is, we're recognizing what aspects of a city work. So, this, again, I agree with Councilmember Piedmont Smith about the semantics of the word overlay. We should have a more formal acknowledgement that Hopewell is a special neighborhood, not so much because it's downtown or mixed use or going to be dense, but because the city is directly controlling its future. And I'm not content to see it just sort of mentioned in passing in the UDO. If this was a more, expedient way to make the changes planning believed needed to be made, I understand that. And again, with all due respect to the consultant, I think that there's more changes that needed to be made, and had the Hopewell plan come before this council, we might have had that discussion then. This discussion has to happen sometime, and I think that there's enough will on this council that that discussion will happen, despite the Hopewell plan having avoided council scrutiny. So with that, I support this amendment. Thank you.
Anyone else? And with no further council comment, I will ask the clerk to call the roll on Amendment 3.
Councilmember Rallo?
Yes.
Flaherty?
Yes.
Smith?
No.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Rosenbarger?
Yes.
Volin?
Yes.
Sims?
Yes.
Scambluri?
Yes.
And Sandberg.
Yes.
Thank
And
you.
that passes 8-1-0. So with the 3 amendments dispatched, we now move to Ordinance 22-10 as amended. I believe we left off with council questions. Is that right?
I think we did.
Yeah, Councilmember Rallo.
Thank you. Ms. Scanlon, so as you alluded to, but I didn't really understand the explanation, there was a tree that is a hybrid Eurasian tree with a sycamore that's been introduced on the tree list. And I wondered, what is the rationale for that?
I'm sorry, I don't have more details other than the trees that we got from the urban forester are those that she felt would be successful. As I described last time, some of these street tree habitats that we have aren't ideal for some trees, including native trees. So some of our like 5x5 tree pits. So this was one of the trees that she had recommended that can do well in some of our limited situations. That's what I know about it.
Okay. Well, thanks for telling us what you know. I'm very apprehensive about this because, we had, we took pains to remove all invasives. And this appears to be a potential for invasives. It's like calorie repair. So it's a bit late for an amendment, but I guess I'm delving into a comment here instead of a question. So,
thank you for
yes. When will we next revisit the UDO?
Next year, I'll be back in 12 months or sooner.
Yes,
We're going to do the update every year or sooner. So as I said at Committee of the Whole for this particular issue of street trees, we have been advised by the urban forester okay, so a couple things. We do of course exclude invasives, but more particularly, we changed the code so that they're native only plants. So I believe that this tree would not be considered an invasive species from the research I've done, but could be considered non-native because it's a hybrid with a non-native. If you see that side of the coin as opposed to also being from a native sycamore. But as I said at Committee of the Whole, I do think we will be bringing forward a package sometime in the next year to kind of go over this in more detail and see if there are certain situations where non-natives actually make more sense because of the constrained areas where our street trees are planted, and sometimes they last longer or are healthier longer. So I do think that I can say safely that within the next year, we'll be back with something more detailed from this list.
Okay, just to follow up, this is code for the development community, but it also is probably going to be, are we intending to plant this hybrid? Is the city, as part of its street tree inventory, is it intending to?
Not that I've heard, so thus far we asked for feedback and comments on trees that they would want to see removed, such as the maples, and then trees that they would want to see included as options for development that would also make it an option for trees being installed by the city. But I have not heard anything specifically about this tree being desired for that.
Would you commit to the city not planting these street trees until we can reevaluate, until we can further evaluate?
I don't know if I can commit to that, but I can commit to speaking to the urban forester and letting her know our concerns. And I don't think that there's any rush or need on their end to have them put in. And that's something we could bring back to you quickly if there was, knowing that your concern, we would work with the Parks Department on that. But yeah, I mean, I do think that's something we can say along with the comments I made about the elm, where we can say, hey, this is here, but we're recommending something else at this time. And we do that often, both with internal projects, working with Ms. Hatch, and with external projects.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Any questions? And seeing no questions from council, we go to the public, if anyone is there with a hand up, wanting to speak to Ordinance 22-10 as amended with the 3 amendments. And I'm seeing a head shake, so with no public comment, we come back to council for any final comment, or Councilmember Rallo.
Thank you. This is on the ordinance as amended, and I wanted to thank my colleague, Councilmember Flaherty, for his amendment, because I think that the Hopewell site does deserve a comprehensive, holistic overlay. But just regarding the trees, I'm sensitive about it because there are so many invasives that we're suffering from. And one of them is calorie pear, which is really locally derived from Bloomington. And you can see this when you drive expressways, what communities used to have, or maybe still do, have calorie pear as part of their street tree inventory because they escape and then go into the countryside. And you can see this like driving on I-69 by Fort Wayne because it's just loaded with these things. So the reason I'm concerned is that since it can hybridize and since it's fertile as a hybrid, that means it's essentially backcrossing with more and more sycamores, meaning that we're essentially sending this exotic into the gene pool of the local sycamore community. And I think that we need to think about that. What do we stand to gain from these trees? And when I look them up, I find that they have really aggressive root structures and they can upend sidewalks and things like that. So it doesn't even seem like they have utility in terms of being practical as a street tree. So that's why I'd like to revisit it, and I look forward to doing it and talking to you some more. Thanks.
Anyone else? Councilmember Boland.
In spirit of Councilmember Rallo's wanting to revisit the UDO, I mean, I certainly concur that we should be thinking about it sooner than next year, but I also wanted to put in a pitch for what I'll be pushing for, which is to persuade people that if you were to remove parking minimums, you're not removing parking from the city. We're not talking about taking away any parking that's already there. We're talking about reducing the ratio of parking to other higher, better uses. And it's only been in the context of affordable housing that it's really been driven home to me how wasteful it is to require apartment buildings, for example, to have a certain amount of parking. Let the developer decide. If anything, we should have a maximum amount of parking that they're allowed to build. One prominent apartment developer who I spoke with when he was proposing a development to us in the past couple of years said he can't unilaterally disarm, in his word, not mine, and not build parking because all of his competitors out on the periphery of the city have vast parking lots. It certainly is a temptation, but if we can, especially in areas like Hopewell, areas downtown, I mean, in the last UDO, 2007, we agreed to allow no minimum parking south of 4th Street. Especially because we built garages. That's where the parking should go, concentrated in one space. And in Hopewell, we have a garage. We shouldn't need anywhere near, now I'm still using the word need. There is no need for parking. There is a demand for parking. And we can control that demand through any other means. But if we feel an obligation to provide supply, that perceived need it's insatiable. We need to when we revisit the UDO, and I hope it's soon, Mr. Rallo, we need to revisit the question of requiring parking, that we shouldn't be requiring it anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Looks like we are ready to call the question on Ordinance 22-10 as amended. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Yes, Councilmember Flaherty?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Rosenbarger?
Yes.
Volan?
Yes.
Sims?
Yes.
Scambalori?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
And Rallo?
Yes.
900, and Ordinance 22-10 passes.
Madam President, I move that Ordinance 2211 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
Second. In favor, say aye. Aye. And will the clerk please read?
Yes, Ordinance 2211 to amend Title 20 of the Bloomington Municipal Code regarding technical corrections set forth in Bloomington Municipal Code 20.05, 20.06, and 20.07. The synopsis is as follows. This petition contains amendments to subdivision standards, administrative procedures, and definitions in the code. These amendments add, remove, or edit existing text to clarify and amend standards, procedures, and definitions. There are 12 amendments identified.
Madam President, I move that Ordinance 2211 be adopted.
All right, and we have another one to present briefly. Do we have a summary?
Great, yes. Ordinance 2211 is related to chapters 5 through 7 of Title 20, Subdivision Standards, Administration and Procedures and Definitions. There is a typo. There are actually 18 amendments listed in the red line as well as the table. But the Plan Commission saw this ordinance as ZO 1322 at its March meeting and voted with a positive recommendation 6-0. So I will briefly go over these. The first you'll see is allowing that environmental protection easements be allowed on site plans that aren't part of subdivisions, which is something the code is currently missing. We are, you'll see in this and in the next the next ordinance, clarifying when the engineering department needs to be involved in processes because they used to be part of planning and transportation. So we would only list our department, and now adding them back into processes as well. Requiring that petitioners or their representatives attend the development review committee that happens before petitions go to Plan Commission so that they can get feedback from various departments. Another part of this ordinance is updating the notice timelines for both published and mailed notice for our Plan Commission, Board of Zoning Appeals, Plat Committee, and Hearing Officer. Right now they vary whether or not they are 21 or 10 days. We are proposing to require that all be 10 days, which is in line with the state code requirements. Part of the reason for doing that with the new development software, we think we will be able to have information available to the public much earlier online where they can track petitions that they're interested in, and that just in a modern way of finding out about petitions or information related to those things going to our boards or commissions, that will be, while we always have that available in the department, that will be available and more easily found online, and that the 10-day notice to adjoiners and in the paper for all 4 boards and commissions will still be appropriate and provide enough time for input for those who haven't possibly engaged otherwise. We are also proposing to amend the thresholds for minor and major subdivision. First of all, to align them, there currently is a gap when there are dwelling units involved for developments with between 30 and 50 units. So aligning that number so that a minor subdivision, now the upper threshold is 50 dwelling units, and then increasing slightly the square footage for developments for non-residential, clarifying that those are non-residential developments for the minor threshold, and then kind of cleaning up some of the double language in the major site plan review section and just referencing back to the minor thresholds. We are also proposing to increase the threshold from 50 to 75 for incentive projects. Again, because we are realigning that upper threshold to 50, increasing the incentives so that you do actually get an incentive and not have it be the base. We are proposing to amend the grading permit exemptions, so up to 2,500 square feet as opposed to 1,000, and allowing for some projects where only foundations or additions below a certain square footage of 5,000 square feet could also be exempted. We are adding back in the subdivision waiver reference from state code. We are able to still use that right now, those waivers, but we are clarifying finding that it is easier for people to be able to read it in the UDO as well. So putting that back in. We did some other small changes, clarifying statements of in our definitions, adding in a definition for ground cover, as well as adding in certificate of zoning compliance to be able to be modified through our minor modification. And I would say the last one of note is that changing in our definition of student housing or dormitory, adding a bottom threshold when more than 33% of the units are 3 bedrooms, to having that be a development that has at least more than 10 dwelling units. And I can answer any questions.
There are any amendments to this one? So are there any council questions regarding Ordinance 22-11? Councilmember Boland.
Scanlon to repeat the very last thing she said because her voice dropped to almost nothing and I didn't hear what she said
Oh, I'm
about
sorry.
student standards.
Sure.
Could you repeat that, please?
Yep. So in the definition of student housing or dormitory, currently, any multifamily dwelling development where 33% of the living units contain 3 bedrooms is automatically defined as student housing. We have had a number of smaller scale developments or discussions with developers where we think that that scope is a little big, capturing developments that weren't intended to be captured for student housing or dormitory. So adding in a threshold of 10 dwelling units. So for projects with 11 or more that have 33% 3 units, those would still be classified as student housing.
All right, I understand what you said now. Thank you for the clarification.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Anyone else? Question? And seeing no questions from council, one more time, we'll go to the public and see if there are any raised hands.
And again, for any member of the public watching on Zoom, if you'd like to comment on Ordinance 2211, you can use the raise hand feature, which you should be able to find under your reactions button or more button in your control bar.
We'll be returning to council for any final comment here in a minute. Seeing no public comment, back to council. And seeing no final comment from council, let us go to our clerk and ask to call the roll on Ordinance 22-11.
Sorry, just a moment. All right, Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Rosenbarger? Sorry.
Yes.
Volan?
Yes.
Sims?
Yes.
Scambalori?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
And now Rallo?
No.
And Flaherty?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
And that passes 8-1-0. We are now ready for our next ordinance.
Madam President, I move that Ordinance 2208 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
Moved in second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
And will the clerk please read?
Yes, Ordinance 2208 to amend Title 20 of the Bloomington Municipal Code regarding technical corrections set forth in Bloomington Municipal Code, Chapter 20, or Title 20. The synopsis is as follows. This petition contains corrections or clarifications in the UDO. These errors range from missing references to terminology correction to missing text to syncing references across the UDO. There are 22 amendments identified, some appearing multiple times in the code.
I move that Ordinance 2208 be adopted.
All right, and if we could have a summary from staff?
Great, thank you. This was seen by Plan Commission as ZO 1022, again at the March hearing, and voted with a positive recommendation of 6-0. This is our more technical ordinance. So making corrections, for example, of references to zoning board of appeals, changing to our terminology of Board of Zoning Appeals. In a couple of the district names, a word was missing, so adding that back in. Cross-referencing some of the changes that we had proposed in the 2210 ordinance. So that is in here as well because of some of the things repeat in Chapter 4 and Chapter 2. We also took out some, or I'm sorry, clarified in the building floor plate section. In a number of places, it said a building floor plate max per lot, but it should actually be per building. Was always the intent and how it's administered. So changing that. We removed some old terminology. So for example, homeless shelter still appeared in the sexually oriented business section related to buffering. Well, we don't have a definition for homeless shelter anymore. That's been incorporated into a separate use. So removing that there and then not proposing to replace that with supportive housing, as that use is much broader than our homeless shelter was previously. It's more of an umbrella definition. And then adding the reference for side and rear parking setback downtown that already existed in Chapter 4 into Chapter 2. So trying to make the code a little bit easier for someone using it and having references in multiple places. Again, doing some corrections where engineering needed to be referenced, doing some terminology updating, for example, changing from the disabled to peoples with disabilities in numerous places in the code, and then making a correction in the home occupation definition where when we did the wholesale update, we are allowing those to be done in approved accessory structures, but the definition didn't reflect that yet. So we needed to change that. So I think those are the major changes, and I can answer any questions.
Thank you. We have 2 amendments. I don't know if anyone wants to introduce.
Sure. I'll move Amendment 1 to Ordinance 2208.
Second.
So once again, this is correcting typographical errors.
All right. Are there any questions about the typographical errors in Amendment 1? And seeing no questions from council, we go to the public. Nobody interested in grammatical, typographical errors from the public? All right, back to council. And seeing no further comments on Amendment 1, let us ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Volin,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
Scambalori, Sandberg,
Yes.
Rallo,
Yes.
Flaherty,
Yes.
and Smith.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, that passes 800. And are we ready to introduce Amendment 2?
Madam President, I'd like to move we adopt Amendment 2 to Ordinance 22-08.
Second.
Thank you.
So this amendment, as alluded to by Ms. Scanlon, is essentially a duplicate of the amendment that the council just passed with a vote of 8-1 for Ordinance 22-10. The same 3 notes dealing with the geographic area in the mixed-use medium scale in the Hopewell development area were called out here as well. They're replicated in multiple parts of the UDO, specifically Chapter 2 and Chapter 4. So this does, again, the same thing that Amendment 3 did for Ordinance 22-10, and for the sake of consistency, I think it makes sense to pass it, as well as for the same substantive reasons. Thank you.
All right, any questions regarding Amendment 2? And again, I will go to staff perhaps for any comment.
I think our only comment, unless Mr. Robinson is standing, is that, separate from the substantive conversation, for clarity, if it wasn't adopted in Chapter 4, it should not be adopted in Chapter 2.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again? That you?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. That for clarity, we do think, separate of the substantive question, that it should, that because you didn't adopt it, because you didn't include the footnotes in Chapter 4, they should not be included in Chapter 2 either.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else with questions for Councilmember Flaherty or staff? And seeing no questions on Amendment 2, back to the public. Seeing no one from the public, any final comment from council? Seeing none, we will ask the clerk to call the roll on Amendment 2.
Okay, Councilmember Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Volin,
Yes.
Sims, Scambalori,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Rallo,
Yes.
Flaherty,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
and Piedmont Smith.
Yes.
Thank you. That passes 9-0. So we are back to ordinance 22-8 as amended. And are there any council questions? Councilmember Boland.
This is a technical question about the technicality of the changes to the UDO. When do we expect that the changes will be effective once this and the previous ordinances, well, the others have been adopted already, but like how long will it take for this to actually make its way into Title 20 so that you can use it?
Clerk Bolden may know this answer better than I, just from doing it for a while. Basically, when the mayor signs it, which I think is usually a reasonably short amount of time, but I'm not quite positive. It's definitely not immediate because he does have to sign them.
But it's not. It doesn't have to go back to Plan Commission, for example. It does. Mr. Robinson
I'm
is
sorry.
here to.
Yes, I'm so sorry. It does have to go back to Plan Commission. I'm sorry. My brain's a little.
So,
it will have to go back to Plan Commission for confirmation of the changes, and then it can be signed.
Yeah, can we get an estimate of like roughly? Are we thinking that it'll be in effect by July 1? By
yes,
August?
I think we're expecting to take it back to Plan Commission in June. So yes,
do they take
I would say
effect
July
at the
is
Plan
reasonable.
Commission? Maybe the clerk can clarify, or Mr. Robinson? Anybody?
The ordinances that the council has amended will need to be returned to the Plan Commission. So I believe there's one that has not been amended. That will be sent to the mayor for his signature and would take effect upon his signature. The other three, should the Plan Commission approve of the council's amendments, I believe those ordinances would then be provided again to the mayor for his signature, and it would take effect as any other ordinance when the mayor signs it. So I don't know if Mr. Robinson has anything to add, or the date the Plan Commission meets next. I know it's in June.
The only thing that I add is the very unlikely event that council decided not to agree with your changes, then it would come back to you to kind of re-ratify that.
You mean the Plan Commission to figure their changes?
Yeah, so we would support, our recommendation to Plan Commission is to accept the changes and we'll carry on. But I said the option or the unlikely event that Plan Commission says, no, wait a second, we don't agree with council, then they would send it back to you to ratify. It just adds another.
Okay, all I know is that whatever printed version of Title 20 I have is, and I need to throw it out. So like how soon will we see, because of all the changes, so how soon will we see the changes like on the website, Madam Clerk?
Pass ordinances, we usually put the ordinance as it's passed on the website immediately, and we send to the codifier the ordinances on a monthly schedule. So when we get the changes back, we'll send them to the codifier. So usually around the first of the month is when you see the changes on the website.
So because it's going to Plan Commission, we're looking at July 1 before we really see it on the site.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Okay. Thank you all.
Or comments on ordinance 22-08? And seeing none, we will ask the clerk to call the roll.
Okay, Councilmember Volin?
Yes.
Sims?
Yes.
Scambalori?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
Rallo?
Yes.
Flaherty?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
And Rosenberger?
Yes.
And ordinance 22-08 passes 9-0.
Madam President, I move that the council introduce and consider ordinance 2216 for adoption at the same meeting and on the same night as it is introduced.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
We have to do
Now,
a voice.
Mr. Lucas, does this need unanimous consent in order to hear this in the same night?
Yes.
So should we call the roll on that just to?
I would suggest.
Okay. So can we call the roll on that?
Councilmember Sims?
Yes.
Scambalori?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
Rallo?
Yes.
Flaherty?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Rosenberger?
Yes.
And Volin?
Yes.
That is unanimous, and that is good. I'm very anxious to get moving on this one.
Madam President, I move that Well, it needs to be introduced,
Oh,
right?
oh.
Introduced it.
Or have I just done that?
Did you have a question? Oh.
So it has been moved and seconded. We've all agreed to hear it. So now I will
That was
ask
sufficient?
the clerk if you will please read.
Yes.
Ordinance 2216 to amend Title II of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Administration and Personnel for amending Bloomington Municipal Code 212130, Citizens Redistricting Advisory Commission. The synopsis is as follows. This ordinance would amend Title II of the Bloomington Municipal Code, Administration and Personnel, to simplify the membership requirements of the Citizens Redistricting Advisory Commission and to update references to state code.
The council adopt ordinance 2216 this evening.
Second.
Very good. And again, Mr. Lucas, can you walk us through the details here?
Yes, happy to go through the changes proposed by Ordinance 2216. The council will remember that the Citizens Redistricting Advisory Commission was created in December of 2020, and since that time, council staff and I know several council members have engaged in efforts to recruit applications for the seats on that commission. We brought changes were considered by the council earlier this year to make that application process a bit simpler. The number of members was reduced from 9 to 5. And in the months since those changes, the selection committee on the council, made up of the 3 at-large members, have conducted several interviews of applicants, have looked at the applications that we have received, and are still running into shortages on some of the seats, given the very specific requirements and limitations on who can serve on this commission. And so the changes contained in this ordinance are meant to open up the commission to more potential members of the public. In particular, we've had difficulty getting applications from students, which the commission is made up of currently 1 non-student Democrat, 1 non-student Republican, 1 student Democrat, 1 student Republican, and it calls for 1 independent member. And so we've, I think to date, received no applications from any student Republicans. We've engaged in fairly extensive outreach efforts and have come up short. So I'll walk through the changes. There are changes first to the membership qualifications. The ordinance would remove the requirement that members be registered voters in the city of Bloomington. I think this is particularly aimed at students, again, who may not have registered to vote here yet. It would remove the requirement that members must have voted as a resident of Bloomington in at least one of the last 2 general elections. This is a big barrier, I think, to students who in the last general election in 2020, many of those students had left Bloomington during the pandemic. The ordinance would also strike the 10-year look-back requirement related to the restrictions on applicants who are current public office holders or county-level political party officers. So the ordinance would still exclude anyone currently serving in public office or as a county-level political officer, but it wouldn't have that 10-year look-back restriction. The ordinance would clarify that the 1 member who is meant to be an independent would self-identify as independent rather than require that they be independent of affiliation from either of the 2 major political parties. This, I think, simplifies how we determine whether they're an independent member or not. It would make a number of changes to the selection process beyond the membership qualifications. It would first eliminate alternates for each of the 5 seats. We've, again, had difficulty just finding 5 qualified, enough qualified members for the seats, let alone an alternate for each of those seats. So this would eliminate that part of the commission. It would also sort of provide an out in the event that we're still not able to fill a seat. So it would allow the selection committee to appoint an applicant to a seat in the event that there's only 1 qualified applicant. Currently, you'll recall there's a coin flip process. So each seat The selection committee is really looking for 2 qualified applicants so that they can have a coin flip between those 2 applicants. In the event that the selection committee is not able to find 2 qualified applicants, they can proceed with the one that they do have, or in the event that there are no qualified applicants that the selection committee has, they can leave the seat empty. Given those changes, it also eliminates the provision that specifies that the independent member shall serve as the chair of the commission in the event that that seat is left empty. Finally, it eliminates a requirement for the commission to hold 3 meetings in 3 different existing city council districts. Councilmember Volin may be able to speak to this, but I think this was originally included as part of modeling this commission off of I think a statewide model, and given the geographic area of Bloomington, it just didn't make sense to require this, and I think this would also help streamline the timeline for the commission to act by the end of the year. And then there's just one housekeeping item that updates a reference to state code. I'm happy to answer any questions. I know I went through that pretty quickly, so happy to display any of the changes or answer questions.
Questions from council? And seeing no questions from council, we will go to the public for one opportunity for them to comment on the changes to the Redistricting Advisory Commission.
And if there are any members of the public on Zoom that would like to comment, again, you can use the raise hand feature, which you can find under the reactions button or the more button in your control bar.
And if there are no hands popping up, we come back to council for any final comments. Councilmember Volin.
Yes, I want to thank my colleagues for bringing these changes. Again, as Mr. Lucas noted, that my original intent with the ordinance was to model as closely as possible the proposal from the League of Women Voters for a statewide redistricting commission. And since then, it's become clear that there were several flaws in using that model, the biggest of which was we didn't need anywhere near as many people. I mean, it was hard to get that many people, harder than it seemed. I mean, that was statewide size. The Monroe County's Redistricting Commission, which was appointed, proved that they could get the job done with 4 people. And so I am quite content to see, I mean, all the changes seemed reasonable. But then the ordinance itself seemed reasonable in December 2020, but I had to bring changes in January that turned out to be insufficient. I'm a little surprised, but this is also the only way we can learn, since there's never been such a commission before. So I'm hopeful that with the passage of this ordinance, we'll finally be able to empanel a commission and get new maps drawn. And Mr. Lucas, I want access to that web map. So call Laura Haley when you can. Thank you very much. Hey, Mr. Lucas.
Thank you.
I'll just add, I believe we've received in the neighborhood of 25 or 26 applications. So for a commission that's never existed before, I think we have received a substantial amount of interest. It's just finding the folks that meet all the specific requirements that's been a challenge. So there's been interest. I think as written, this excludes a lot of the folks most likely to be interested. So.
Again, that it was modeled on a statewide model, where there's never been such a thing before. So we've all learned, and this is the way to go. Thank you.
Flaherty.
Yes, first just wanted to say thanks to council staff for helping drive these changes, and the clerk staff and council staff both for supporting all the work that's already gone into trying to select folks, outreach, also members of the public and others who've helped facilitate outreach and try to get qualified applicants. I do think it's a good approach. I appreciate Councilmember Volin, bringing this to begin with and working through these changes. I think the thing that ultimately really got us was COVID, combined with the short time frame with which undergraduate students in particular are here, and the way they interacted with several other requirements. We wound up with a situation where if you were a senior, you're graduating and you're not going to be here. If you were a freshman or sophomore, you weren't here during the last voting cycles when you needed to have voted. So that left juniors who were freshmen during 2020, the last vote, had been here I guess, not long, and were sent home, so it'd be very surprising if they would have registered to vote already and voted in Bloomington. So we, specifically because of COVID, I think, really precluded us from finding the positions that the ordinance originally called for. So I do think something pretty close to what we had originally would have been viable, maybe with some minor tweaks, a little bit less substantive than we had to do with the short time scale we're dealing with now. But just wanted to mention that for context as well. Thanks.
Thank you. I would just like to thank my fellow at-large council members, Councilmember Flaherty and Councilmember Sims, because we've put in quite a bit of time already getting the good group of applicants that we already have in the pipeline here. We just need to round it out with a few more, and we'll be ready to go with this Redistricting Advisory Committee. And it's very important that we do this as soon as possible. So anything else from council? All right, seeing no further comments, let us call the question on Ordinance 22-16. Oh, wait a minute, we've already done that, right? Call the roll, yeah.
And just a point of information, this will require 2/3 vote of council
Okay.
to adopt this tonight.
Councilmember Scambalori.
Yes.
Sandberg.
Yes.
Rallo.
Yes.
Flaherty.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Piedmont Smith.
Yes.
Rosenbarger. Yes. Volin.
Yes.
And Sims.
Yes.
And that passes 9-0-0. We now move to additional public comment. If there are anyone out there who would like to make a comment on something not discussed in tonight's meeting, not on tonight's agenda.
Zoom, so if any of you all would like to comment, please use the raise hand feature.
Not seeing any interest? All right, now let's talk about council schedule coming up.
Just one reminder, I believe. Actually, two items. A reminder that the council has a scheduled work session this Friday, which is an opportunity to hear about items coming forward during the next legislative cycle, which is also the last legislative cycle before the council's recess. There will be a number of TIF district ordinances coming your way, and I believe 2 of those may be ready to preview this Friday. There will also be a mid-year salary ordinance update that HR is bringing to the council. So Caroline Shaw, I believe, will be ready to preview the changes that are being proposed there. I believe at the last meeting before the summer recess, the council will be considering the Jack Hopkins funding resolution. So if there's any desire to hear a preview on that, the Jack Hopkins committee met yesterday actually and finalized their recommendations, so that could be previewed as well. And finally, this tees up another question for the council. You'll recall that the council canceled the April 26th budget advance meeting that you all had scheduled in light of the uncertainty around the economic development local income tax proposal. That meeting has yet to be rescheduled, and I believe the administration has been in touch with the clerk's office and council president about rescheduling that meeting for May 31st. And so ahead of that May 31st meeting, if the council would like to go ahead and schedule that May 31st meeting tonight, it could do so. And this Friday's work session could serve as an opportunity to kind of tee up the discussion for May 31st. And also June 14th, which is a current budget discussion meeting that the council has scheduled on your annual schedule. So those were the reminders. The question tonight is, would you like to go ahead and schedule that May 31st budget discussion meeting, and what time should that start?
I think we've gotten pretty good consensus from council being available. It's a matter of the start time. And Councilmember Piedmont Smith, did you have an issue with starting? I think it was recommended to start at 5 to 7, but you had another meeting that night that would cause us to maybe start later. Is that my understanding?
Yes, I have an executive committee meeting of the Solid Waste Management Board at 5. Should be an hour.
So would that be too tight of a window? 6:30 for start
If we
time?
could do 6:30, I would appreciate it.
6:30 on May 31st. How does everyone else feel about that start time? Are there any issues? I'm not seeing any issues, so shall we go ahead and recommend that that be the start time to the administration? They are on hold because they know there's some, concern about the start time. So this will be like 6:30 to 8:30 on May 31st for our first session of a budget retreat. Yeah, they want to go in a 2-hour increment for these, so. All right, do we need to put that to a vote, or can?
If there's no objection, I think the council president can call that. And if there are
Okay.
no objections, and again, this Friday's work session, I know there are some questions that have come up over the last couple of years about how the budget is presented and prepared for the council. So I think the administration may be present or listening on Friday to kind of tee up the May 31st and again the June 14th budget discussions that are scheduled now.
So the work session on Friday is going to be a fairly busy one. Do we need to have a show of hands as who can attend? Okay. Thank you very much. Yes.
Will the Friday discussion also be about the preparations for the budget, like design, as we talked about? Are we going to be able to talk about that on Friday as well?
Yes.
Yes, I think if time allows, I think you can get into that, yes.
Thank you.
Again, this may go a little longer than our normal hour. We might want to plan for that. Hopefully not. Maybe we can get it done. All right. There's no further discussion about the work session on Friday or anything else coming up. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Good night, everyone. We are finished.